Yeah, and we definitely see historically that the moment civilization started happening, the more a monotheistic concept started happening, and the more the move towards the magnificent temple of creating godliness. And I think, in art in general, we always try to make perfection, and we see this with the Greeks. The Greeks were trying to make perfection in the human form. And something that always stuck out to me when I was in art school is they were talking about the moment that Greeks achieved perfection, they threw it away and they started making it more perfect.
Traveling to consciousness, exploring spiritual journeys to find answers in uncertainty.
What is up, conscious monkeys? Welcome to another episode of Traveling to Consciousness. As always, I'm your host, Clayton. Today's guest is primarily a YouTube content creator. He goes by the handle The Wisdom of Odin, and he talks about all things paganism and identifies as a Norse pagan. He's got his first book out called A Yule Story. And just joining us in the green room, he told us that it's a miracle that he's actually alive and even here today. So I can't wait to even jump into that. With all that being said, conscious monkeys, welcome to the show, the Wisdom of Odin himself, Jacob Toddson. Jacob, thanks for being here, man.
Hey, it's so nice to be here. I've done quite a bit of podcasts, and on my own as well, but I always love doing them because the conversation really does take a life of its own. So it's been a bit since I've done one, so I'm curious to see what life this conversation takes on.
Well, I'm honored that you came back to the podcast realm for this podcast because I'd love to at least start this off with like a little bit of my background and my cultural understanding around paganism, because I found it so fascinating how I have like a few pop culture references where they reference paganism, and yet for some reason, every time that it was referenced, I could feel this like almost negative energy, I want to say, attached to it, or some sort of like weirdness, or like it goes against the grain of culture. So I at least want to like kind of set this stage of trying to understand either what paganism is, or if you even have an idea of how this misconstrued nature of paganism has kind of bled into kind of society as a whole.
Right. So something I think I'm called to talk about here is just terminology in general, because I think I see a lot of people fight over terminology of certain things. Because you'll talk to people who I would deem a pagan, they're like, "Oh, I'm not a pagan. I don't like using that term." And then other people who are Norse pagan are like, "Oh, I only say heathen. I don't like the Norse pagan term," or they'll say asatru. And so terminology to me is just a way for people to divide themselves further. So I'm really big on wrapping ourselves around ideas. And I think when I talk about paganism, I'm talking about the idea of looking at the world the way our ancient ancestors did and discovering what they found out with their limited knowledge of the universe. Like science has helped us so much understand everything. And the more we understand about science, the more we understand about our own reality. But looking back, we see that our collective ancestry was understanding those things. And yeah, they might have called it a deity or a spirit or an ancestor or a demon or a god, but they still were understanding those things, and they were able to do it because they were so in tune with their natural world. And so when I say pagan, or I think paganism as a whole, I think it's this collective movement of people trying to understand the world the way our ancestors did.
Mm. That's super fascinating, because even in the few videos that I saw of yours, it seemed like you, at least the way you articulated it, was almost like whenever there was like a mountain range or nature, you're saying like this is the best way to learn about it, and you would cast it almost in the sense of like the gods of the mountains or the gods of the lake, the gods of this. And it really kind of hit me as a way that I've always been trying to understand it, where in past cultures, whether it was Egyptian and in this case pagan, it seems like the term god almost meant the energy of, like the energy of the mountains, the energy of the wind, the energy of love, the energy of hate. So would you agree with your knowledge of paganism that this is kind of the way that they're trying to articulate or use the word God in their sense or in their vocabulary?
It's certainly one component of it, because storytelling is also a very big component, as well as folklore and mythology. We're storytellers. We're basically telling a story here on this podcast, and humans have been doing this since we could speak, since we could communicate. We wanted to share stories. And so I think this understanding of energy, or this connection with energy, got wrapped in with our love of storytelling. And through that, we started building archetypes and gods and deities. And in the end, we might call things different, but at the end of the day, we're all actually connecting to very similar presences that our history, our lineage, where we come from, have influenced and given us different interpretations of relatively similar concepts. You said like the mountain. I think about my time in the Alps, the first time I ever saw, the Swiss Alps, and I was like, this is a fairy tale. There's no way this exists. I'm looking at this happy little meadow with cows going down. There's this snow-capped peak over here with a crystal clear lake. And then again, I put myself in that mind of the ancestors. I'm, someone in 2000 BC, walking my herd of sheep through this valley. How could they think that this isn't a god, or there isn't a godly presence, when this is so much bigger than themselves? Especially since, like the elements were so dangerous back then. We live in these lives now. Yeah, I got my heat on in my apartment, so I don't have to think about it. But they had to think about those things of staying warm, of feeding themselves, of clothing themselves, of surviving. And so putting elements of godliness to these things were just ways of them coping with it. But that doesn't mean that those elements are not still important to us now.
Oh, for sure. And I think that's something beautiful that you can see in Catholicism or even Christianity when they create churches. Because if you go throughout Europe and see all the churches that have ever been created, the energy is almost the same of this wow energy, or like this holy shit kind of energy. And I guess no pun intended there, like not to be rude to the holiness of that, but like that energy of like, I can't believe something this magnificent, this beautiful, this shiny almost exists. And it invokes almost that wow essence. And to your point, they were finding that in nature. Whereas it seems like this shift into Catholicism, they wanted to create these temples, in this case churches, to almost create or invoke that wow or that godly type energy whenever people would see it or come into worship, or to just to almost invoke it of inciting that godly energy.
Yeah, and we definitely see historically that the moment civilization started happening, the more a monotheistic concept started happening, and the more the move towards the magnificent temple of creating godliness. And I think, in art in general, we always try to make perfection, and we see this with the Greeks. The Greeks were trying to make perfection in the human form. And something that always stuck out to me when I was in art school is they were talking about the moment that Greeks achieved perfection, they threw it away and they started making it more perfect. They had this human form, but they would remove the spine. And so it would actually be concave rather than out. They would change the butt, the butt structure to make the butt more refined. And so they started perfecting what was already made. And so
Mm.
we see this throughout the creation of civilization. Is the more we move into these urban areas, the more we start to move away from that natural world, and the more we start to manipulate it and create our own vision of these concepts.
An interesting idea that's kind of coming to me when you're saying this is the idea of models, because I know I was like a 90s baby, and I know whenever I was growing up, the idea of models were like super like whole skinny, girls who were usually bulimic or like always throwing up, not the healthiest, right? Like health
Right.
wasn't the pinnacle. It was like, are you small? Are you, kind of dainty in a sense? And now it's almost like healthier, right? Like a model kind of has more curves to them. They have a little bit more, they probably lift a little bit. And so I find that to be like a pretty interesting parallel in regards to this idea of what we deem being the pinnacle of our truth, of whether it's beauty or whether it's, our ideology whenever it comes to religion or spirituality or paganism or otherwise.
Oh, for sure. And, I could see a pathway of a conversation here. I was like, man, there's a whole conversation on like the evolution of like, what we deem as beautiful, like the whole, we haven't had a president with facial hair since I think Teddy Roosevelt, and mostly,
Interesting.
political figures, nowadays, typically beard equals evil. And that's mostly because of the Hitler mustache, the Stalin mustache, or even, I'm trying to think of there was that one, I can't remember his name, but he had like a big beard as well. Castro. And so like the political leader with facial hair became taboo because it was like, oh, those were the bad guys. And in order to be set yourself apart, most political figures took on the clean shaven face. And so that's not something that's necessarily, religious or spiritual. It's societal. And so it is really hard to kind of cut through, and they're no less interesting, mind you, still very interesting, but figuring out the spiritual reasons we did things and the cultural reasons we did things.
Well, then staying on that topic, through your history of examining paganism and maybe Christianity as a whole, have you been able to kind of see or observe throughout history why there was almost this cultural stigma that might have been attached to paganism as being kind of this, I hate to say dirty, but dirty seems the word that comes to mind, is that it feels like, it kind of gets lumped in with witchcraft and sort of, it's weird because I feel like I've never had direct, like, paganism is bad, paganism is evil.
Right.
But there's this like weird like stigma that I even had a conversation with somebody at a Christmas party last weekend where I like was like, oh, I'm talking to someone about paganism, and I could kind of even see it in their face like back up, and I was like, yes, I was like, I don't know why I do that either, and they were like, I don't know why I kind of like pulled away from paganism. So in your research, have you found where or how that stigma has kind of came into the cultural landscape?
Yeah, and I think right here, since it's pretty early in the podcast still, it's important to note that, my degree is in art. I was an art student, and the reason I got into this is because I was just into personal research, and I was looking into books and things like that myself. I went to this special collection library at my college, and they wheeled out this Indiana Jones style cart with this little tiny pamphlet that I was researching into like the Norse gods. And that really is what started my journey. So everything I say is just my own personal research and exploration and experience. And so
Love
I
that.
like to make sure that people understand whenever they listen to me that I'm not the law in anything. I am just a guy that is sharing his ideas and concepts. So take with it, with a grain of salt. Make sure you do your own research. I'm very big on that. But as far as this topic, because this is a huge topic of cultural stigma towards paganism, because it goes back for hundreds and hundreds of years, and Christianity is a big part of it. And I'm pretty big on making sure that doesn't mean I hate Christians now. I am friends with many people that are perfectly Christian and perfectly fine. I don't try to convert them. I don't hate them for it. It's just a part of our global collective, history is that, society moved away from the pagan religions and started to instill these monotheistic religions. And I basically because it's easier to control people under a monotheistic religion. We see this no more evident in
Mm,
Denmark. So Denmark, the reason they went to Christianity, it was Harold Bluetooth that converted them, is because he wanted to be the true king of Denmark. And when you have these people worshiping, 14 different deities and they having 14 different identities, even more so, they're not going to worship and look after one king. They're going to be like, no, there's no one king. And so in
mm,
order to become the one king of Denmark, he needed to make sure there was religion that supported the one king of Denmark. And we see this, pretty accurately through most of the conversion era of what we know. Of the moment there was one person that wanted to be the one king of somewhere is when they converted to Christianity. Obviously, there was missionary work. Obviously, there was people converting on their own. But when it became to the nation converting, it was usually because someone wanted power. And Christianity really allows power to exist. Now, there was demonization at this point. I don't think necessarily at the state level, but at the cultural level. But for the most part, people were allowed to still practice the old ways, so to speak, but in private. And we see this in Iceland as well. Iceland basically agreed to convert, but I always hear it as the pagan mullet. They in the front they were Christian, in the back they were pagan. And
mm.
so a lot of Iceland just went underground, and so they built churches. They said we're Christian, but on their farmsteads and everything like that, they kept the faith alive, so to speak. And the reason I say all this is because it wasn't until the witch trials that the demonization really started happening. And there was a very aggressive attack on pagan traditions. Like in Denmark, I went to Ribe, which is like the oldest city there. And it's also the site of the most aggressive witch trials there, where they were burning people at the stake and whatnot. And we see this across Scandinavia and Germany and across Europe and then even into the West and all over the world. And it really wasn't until like the 1400s that this demonization really happened. I don't know why, but those things are still in us today. They're still at the foundation, especially here in North America, because those things very quickly moved over here as North America was becoming to be colonized. And we see that no more evident in the Salem witch trials. And so this idea of anything that is not God is the devil. And so I think that's where a lot of it comes from, is saying, oh, you play with stones, you play with crystals, you use sage, you use incense. That's not godly, or that's even Catholic. Catholic use incense. That's not godly. That's not real Protestant Christianity. And so it becomes the devil. And I think that's hard to escape, even if we don't actively think about it.
Yeah, there's a lot to break down there, because I know even in the content that I create, I guess if I had to put a word on what I was, it would probably be more spiritual. Like, I'm more spiritually aligned, but it's still kind of this, like, finding all the different puzzle pieces of just like what makes the most sense to me. And where was I going with that? Oh, whenever I put out content, like, I'll say out certain things that feel right to me. And it's weird because if I say something that's against the grain, especially from a religious perspective, a lot of people will push back and be like, "Oh, this is the devil's work. Be careful. The like fucking aliens. Like, people think aliens are devils. Like, I don't know where you stand on aliens, but like, I'm just like, if I even talk about aliens, people are like, yeah, those are technically devils. Like, I'm just like, okay, this
Yeah.
shit's kind of getting out of control. But I did want to touch on the Salem witch trials real quick, because I heard on a podcast, I forget which one. Like, part of me wants to say Joe Rogan, but it was some podcast, and they were talking about how the way that they like dug down into the earth. And when you dig down into the earth, you can kind of test the soil and sediment levels and see the humidity. You can get all these indicators of what's going on in the environment. And from what I saw is that it was like a very moist environment. It was very moist time for humanity in general. And what was happening was on bread is that mold was starting to form on the bread, and people had no idea and they were still eating it. But the crazy thing about this mold is that it was actually a psychoactive mold. And so when things would occur that would be like out of their realm of understanding, they would blame witchcraft. They would be like, you're operating like with witchcraft, and it scares the shit out of them because they don't
Right.
understand that psychedelics are opening up their mind to this like new worldly thing. And so what this geologist, or I really wish I could remember who or where I heard this. So guys, definitely do your own research on this. But the core concept or theory that he was proposing was that mold and bacteria was growing on bread that was causing people to basically trip balls. And then they were calling out people for being witches because something crazy would happen. They would see someone do quote unquote something as like a witch. And then they'd be like, holy fuck, like, we got to kill this person because this is the devil. Like, only God has this power. You're either God or the devil. And if there's only one God, right, then this person has to be the devil.
I don't know how much I can add to that conversation about that, because it sounds really fascinating, but I haven't seen anything about it
Feel
or heard
free,
anything about
feel
it.
free to pivot. I was just
Yeah,
throwing that
yeah.
information out there for you.
I think that the thing I'm called to say here is, when it comes to my personal practices, and even into like psychedelics, and then in this instance with the Salem witch trials, is Protestant Christianity is very unfocused on personal experiences. It's very centered around, I mean, Catholicism as well, but they have more of a ritual mindset, from my understanding. I was never raised Catholic or really part of Catholicism, so I can't speak too heavily on it, but I know there's a more emphasis on ritual and tradition. But Protestant Christianity, me coming from a Baptist background, it was more about the church. Like, really, you had your baptism, and then you went to church, and that was it. And it was all centered around the pastor. It was centered around the songs, and reading the Bible, and regurgitating the Bible. And so when it came to experiences, it was very low. And so if you start having these experiences, whether it spiritual or on, a psychedelic, or, mushrooms or whatever, I don't think they know what to do with that, because they're not trained, at least in my experiences as a Baptist, you're not trained to deal with experiences. And you start going up to someone like, hey, I saw a tree and I felt something. Is that God? They'll be like, ooh, that might be witchcraft. It's like, no, it's just an experience. And then you have people that, come to a new world. They start eating some, bread that makes them feel certain kind of ways. And all of a sudden they start having experiences, and they're like, well, this just must be the devil's work, because this is not how religion works. And since everything that is other is the devil, it has to be.
Mm. Yeah, it's kind of where I guess my mind was at least going with it in those regards. But let's push this back to paganism, because I'm still very fascinated with it, because you mentioned that this is kind of so what it might be some like groundwork that we can use to work with paganism, because you mentioned that it's you alluded to that it's polytheistic, that they believe that there's multiple different gods. And what are kind of like, are there like bedrock tenets that, because then there's also different types of paganism, right? You're saying there's Celtic pagan, you say that you're Norse pagan. So what's kind of like this umbrella of paganism, and then what differentiates between different types of paganism in general?
So again, this is a huge topic and very, very hard to cover. That's why I
Yeah.
have an entire channel of over almost 300 videos now that talks about it. But the way I boiled it down, so this is my personal way that I oversimplified it to make sense of it, and a way that I can shift it over to other viewpoints and understand it. It's what gods do they venerate? Who, in the sense of ancestors or people, do they venerate? And what spirits do they venerate? And once you can kind of answer those questions for whatever paganism you're trying to,
Real
to
quick, what do you
figure
mean
out.
by venerate? I don't think I'm
Oh,
familiar with
venerate as
that
far
word.
as like, like worship. I don't
Oh,
typically say
okay.
worship because I think that's just from my time in Christianities. I don't typically say worship, but
Right on.
venerate in the sense of giving offerings or speaking with or working with, performing rituals too, such as that.
Okay.
So who do they actually worship? For anyone else out there. So you look at the Nordic or Germanic people. Okay, what gods do they follow? Okay, they followed Odin. They followed Thor or Woden or Donar. And then okay, what people do they venerate? Oh, they had heroes. They also had ancestors. They called heavily to their ancient kings. Okay, what do they believe in spirits? Oh, they worshipped in sacred groves. They used, even the Celtic region within Germany, they, worshipped the oak tree. They believed in reincarnation. That's, part of spirit. And so that gives you a better idea of the Germanic region. Well, then you take those concepts of the gods, the people that venerate in the spirits, and you move down to ancient Greece and you start investigating it more. And so everyone's going to be different and everyone's going to have their own interpretations of everything. But when I boil it down to the gods, the folk, the people and the spirits, that's how I understand these things.
Is that it's basically just whoever it is that they're worshiping. So it seems like then at a high level, paganism is almost, and please correct me wherever I kind of am wrong on this, paganism is almost just being polytheistic and then venerating, we'll use the word venerating, meaning worship, venerating, those gods and then certain traditions. And is paganism almost like the most recent or the last cultural, I guess that's probably not the right way to phrase it, but is it like the most recent or the most modern way of basically just being polytheistic?
Well, I don't know if calling paganism the most recent makes the most sense because I think when you're calling to this again with terminology, because technically Wicca is a fairly modern thing. Like the actual religion of Wicca is fairly modern, but the practice of witchcraft is very old. And then you say, if I say I'm a Norse pagan, the Norse pagan movement is fairly young. And yet, however, the ideas that are based around Norse paganism are very, very old. And so I would definitely say currently there is a revival of ancient traditions and ancient religions that are getting kind of roped into this, large pagan umbrella. Because there's just so much under there. Because, like I said, Wicca again is fairly young, and yet that's under the pagan umbrella of something like Norse paganism, and even people that are like Reconstructionists in the sense they're trying to do things exactly the way the ancestors did 2,000 years ago. And so it's just it gets kind of complicated, but so I don't know if that answers your question, but it's very complicated.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's take like timeline out of it, right? I guess maybe I'm still having difficulty understanding like what makes somebody pagan, because even as I go kind of through your content a little bit, it's like there's pagan clothing, there's pagans in Canada and Kentucky, just based on what you're creating and putting out there.
Right.
There's Celtic paganism, there's Norse paganism. So what is like the seed or the stem that combines all of these things together, that it's like, okay, I identify as pagan, but then of course, like I'm a Canadian pagan, I'm this, I'm that pagan. But like, what's
Yeah.
the core of it that makes someone a pagan?
Again, I don't know. I don't know if I have the authority to fully answer that, I guess, is the thing I'm struggling with here, because I don't speak for all pagans in a sense. But I guess if you had to say what is a pagan, is really, I guess, what is we're trying to answer here is a pagan is someone who follows, any non-conforming religion or non-traditional religion, I guess is maybe the best way to put it. Not the big five. Not Christianity, not Islam, not Hindu, not Buddhist. but someone who follows, because I guess New Age would probably be the better term for that, like, in the sense of like New Age new religious movements, because a lot of times you hear the term neo-pagan, and that's all that means is new pagans. And so that, in the sense, encompasses a lot of people starting to follow this in the last 50 or so years.
Okay. So then this might push you a little bit, but let me know. I'm pushing your understanding here. So then if paganism is everything that's outside of the big five, then where comes in that separation of, because I've heard of Wicca before. I haven't found someone to bring on the podcast about Wicca, but from your understanding, what's then the difference between paganism and Wicca?
Oh gosh. Let me get a chart. I need to like draw something over here. I feel like, because I think the best way I can talk about this is because you watched my Celtic paganism video, and I kind of address it here a little bit. Is Celtic paganism was before Wicca, in the sense of like the ancient Celtic belief system. And then Wicca started popping up in the 1900s and was heavily influenced from Celtic paganism, but is ultimately its own new thing. And that's where we get a lot of the timeline does exist, because a lot of it is timeline. I call myself a Norse pagan, but I'm influenced by the modern era, and yet I draw from an ancient root system. And so maybe that's ultimately the pagan concept, is drawing from something that is pre-Christian, that is pre-monotheism, is the best way to put it.
Okay. Yeah, and maybe that's a good way to illuminate it, because the way that, let me see here, if I was to articulate Christianity, right? Like, it came basically out of Judaism. I don't know the proper way to pronounce that, but it basically started off as Judaism, and then the people who said, "Oh, Christ is the Lord and Savior," that's what branched off into Christianity. And then, of course, out of that, you have so many different types of Christianity. You have Catholic, Roman Catholic, you have Presbyterian, you have non-denominational, right? But the core crux of it is that everyone believes that Christ was the Lord and Savior of,
Yeah.
they was God's son. He was the Lord and Savior. Whereas Jews didn't, like, they believe that Jesus was a prophet, but that he's still, the savior of humanity still hasn't kind of come yet. And so that's where Christianity branched off of Judaism. So I guess that's kind of where my question is in regards to paganism. But even as I was watching some of your videos, you did highlight that this was and to kind of say, quote unquote, save you a little bit. You did point out in a lot of your videos that a lot of pagan history, whether it was Celtic, whether it was Norse, whether it was whatever it was, Germanic, they didn't really write anything down. It was all
Right.
very like verbally passed down. And so if you have a large section of people who just stop worshiping it, whether it's out of fear of the Catholic Church, whether it's out of, whatever reason they had for stopping their worship of it, there's so much information that then gets lost because nobody's writing books or writing down what it is that they believe paganism actually to be.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess like the best way is, to really wrap a bow on this like line of thought is, this is not something I think about too much. It's not something that I really think is important, is the terminology. I use terminology to reach others, in the video where, it's like pagans in Canada, and it's like, that's the most searching term people use. They're like, oh, I'm a pagan, I worship old gods, I'm in Canada. And so they connect those two things. But in the actual everyday, practice that I have, I don't really think about it. It's more about like, I go outside and I feel the trees that are now. I connect to the gods that, I understand. I connect to my ancestral line. And so those are the things that are really important to me. And I think my favorite line I've kind of said over the last few months, and really this year, is what has made this religion survived, and what has made a lot of pagan religions have survived, is scholarly work, is history, is researching, because they didn't write things down. And so we've had to research, we've had to dig things up, we've had to translate and do all these very high level thinking things to bring it back. And yet what we are bringing back is a religion of illiterate farmers, because the majority of people that follow these ancient religions couldn't read and couldn't write, and had very little understanding of their outside world. And so those two things are at conflict all the time, because I'm trying to return to the religion of illiterate farmers, maybe more so of the literate type now, but that's ultimately what I'm trying to return to, is a simple life, is a simple understanding of the universe, even though we live in this very big and complicated world. And so in order to understand it, we have to think, we have to research, but the goal is to actually simplify.
No, I think that's really a beautiful sentiment in general because of how intertwined our worlds with technology and meeting new people and seeing new things, that getting back to something that's more simple, more basic in a sense, can be so very therapeutic for people. And so I guess even with that being said, what are like daily practices that you do that you learn from maybe your history researching pagan ideology?
So I guess, the most important thing to me is gratitude. And this is a surviving thing in a lot of shamanic practices. You see a lot of the core of any practicing shamans today that survive and still practice, family lines that go back hundreds of years. The most important thing they usually tell you is gratitude, of being thankful for the life that you live. And that's like the most core tenet into spiritual belief, because, when we give an offering to a deity, we're thankful, we're giving something, we're exchanging something. And so having daily gratitude, actually can sound like really like soccer mommy. But
Dude,
to
I'm
me,
all from spirituality perspective, I'm all on board with gratitude.
yeah. And
Which is
so like,
wild because that's like the first thing I do when I wake up is I like list off 5 things I'm grateful for. And
yeah,
even anytime I feel like I'm in a bad mood, I like just focus on one thing. Like recently it was like my laptop and I'm just like listing off reasons I'm thankful for it, like what it allows me to do. And it's crazy how much that just like shifts your perspective. Sorry to I was
no,
I
yeah,
was
yeah,
feeling the rant, but I just that
do
overlap,
it.
I couldn't just sit by and listen to that massive overlap and like kind of what I do and what I practice and what you're saying and do in practice as a pagan.
Well, yeah, like I one of the practices of like this book, it's Spirit Walking by Evelyn Rydyk, I think is the name. I don't have it around me right now, but one of the daily practices it has in there for like learning, shamanic practice, is reflecting on just one element of your life and what it took to get you there. And of course, me, I spend a lot of my time in coffee shops because I like to be a pretentious hipster when I do my script writing.
You got a little bit of a hipster vibe going, so
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I lean into it.
if it's your vibe, it's
But
your vibe.
yeah, hey, I own it, man. I like going to coffee shops, like drink my cappuccinos with my Mac laptop, and it's a good time.
Just lean
But
into it.
but doing that, but taking that step back and looking at that cup of coffee and like, what did it take to get this cup of coffee in front of me? The people that harvested the beans themselves, the plants they came from, the generation of plants that brought those beans to that place, no matter where they are. Let's just say they're in Ecuador or something like that. The people that harvest those beans, the people that roast those beans, the people that ship those beans, the people that built that ship, the people that built that roaster, the people that made that cup, the barista, what got the barista here. And before you know it, to get that cup of coffee in front of you, you involve thousands of human lives. And
It's
that is
insane.
insane because that
Yeah.
was not true in the past. You
Dude,
know,
I've been doing that for like food. Like I used to eat a lot of bacon and eggs and like just to have that mental process of like yeah, why did I start that? Oh, it was like out of this spite of like trying to kind of project love almost and into every stage of that development, like imagining that the chickens are getting love and then, they're giving the
yeah.
eggs and then they're being harvested. So yeah, dude, and it's crazy mental process because then you're like, oh, I just showed up at a store and got this, but it's like the entire organism of humanity in order to cultivate this thing that's so simple and easy for us to get now is like it's crazy. It's so
Yeah,
crazy. But
yeah,
this might also lead you into the next part because it almost makes us a little bit more detached from the whole process of like where did this egg come from? Where did how did this bread made? How was this bread made? How was this thing packaged? How did we get all these things into the store? Um, but maybe I'm kind of going down the wrong rabbit hole.
no, I mean, I'm sitting here thinking about actually, funny enough, when I bought this Mac, I went to the Mac store and I was in there talking. And I was, he was asking me what I did. And I was like, oh, I make, YouTube videos and things like that. And, this is just a normal everyday guy I meet in a Mac store. So I'm not going to dive in and be like, well, I worship Odin and, like sprinkle fake blood onto God bowls that people carve. I'm not going to tell him that. But he was like, oh, what do you make videos about? And at that time, I was making a video kind of about this, about gratitude. And it was about winter and what we, don't realize about winter. And I was like, hey, man, it's like, I bet you can go across the street right now in the middle of December and buy a pineapple at Whole Foods. And he was like, yep. I was like, you think that's a little weird? He's like, I never really thought about it. And I'm like, 50 years ago, you couldn't do that. I was like, your grandparents couldn't go to a store in December and buy a pineapple. And even so much so, pineapples used to be the ultimate symbol of hospitality, because if you had a pineapple on your like mantle of your fireplace, you were rich, because oh my gosh, you got a pineapple. That's so hard to get. And now it's so casual to just go across the street in December and buy a pineapple. It makes me think, the younger generation coming up. I mean, I'm not that old, but like the generation that's getting raised right now, and even mine, our generation, I think we're the same age, is they don't understand these things of how these things got to these places. It just is.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you don't think about it, I mean, it comes back to that simplification, right? We want a more simplistic life. So there's almost like these thought processes that we just almost abandon. It's like, okay, the apple's here, cool. I'll just take it and eat it. But even it's so fascinating to even think about it in terms of like the weather. It's like it's December. It's fucking
Yeah.
December and January. Well, this podcast is going to get released in January, but it's January. It's 30 degrees outside and I'm in the middle of Canada or northern Canada. And yet I can go down to a store and grab a pineapple. It's like, first of all, even whenever it's summertime, pineapples don't grow in northern Canada.
Right.
And yet to be able to have that thing there year round is a miracle. Like
Yeah.
that is the most like almost not law defining, nature defying aspect or ability to, I hate to say the word conquer, but to manipulate like our society or work together even to be able to have a tropical fruit in the most barren tundra year
Right.
round.
Like, just imagine going back to, people that lived 100 years ago and describing that to them. It would blow their mind. Like, what do you mean you eat tropical fruit in northern Canada? Like, that doesn't make any sense to me.
It's crazy.
What is a superstore? What is that smartphone you have in your hand? Like, what are you talking about? The world has changed so much in the last 100 years. It's almost incomprehensible how much the world has changed.
Oh, see, and it's cool too because I've always thought about it in terms of like, because I fly a lot, like whenever I travel, and to fly from Pittsburgh to, let's say, Florida, for instance, it takes about 2.5 hours. Back in the day, dude, that took like, if we're talking about wagon and carriage, that would take like a week or so, and like half my family would die on that trip. And now it's like 2 hours. Like the probability of me getting there safe and sound is like 99%. Dude, so it's just a miracle. But to even look at it in the terms of food, and I can't I can't even imagine how many other life processes that we just take for granted nowadays
Yeah.
that we're not grateful for.
Well, I think that's one of the things, like, we don't always have, like, the community that's, come from the channel. We don't always have events in like really primitive settings. We do sometimes, but I do appreciate when we have them in primitive settings, because it's like your daily routine gets so thrown off, and it makes you really think about your daily routine of, okay, I go grab some water, I use the bathroom, I make myself a cup of coffee, I get to work. It's like, do those things in a primitive environment and realize how much that longer that takes. Oh, where's my fresh clean water? Oh, I gotta boil water to make sure it's clean. That takes time. Oh, let me use the bathroom. Well, that's a whole nother thing out in the wild.
Yeah.
Let me go get my morning breakfast. Oh, I don't just have a fridge with bacon in it. I need to. Oh, luckily enough, I brought some with me. Stuff like that. And so it really makes you reflect on how many automated processes we have now that we don't have to think about. So, and all in all, throughout this conversation, I'm thinking, we should be the most grateful motherfuckers on the planet, because we have the easiest lives of anyone that has ever existed that we know. And yet it seems like we're so ingrateful to our lives.
Dude, it's crazy. And it's funny too, because about what I'm about to say, I know majority of my podcast listeners are in first world countries, which super grateful for you guys. But I find it interesting because whenever I've traveled, I've been all over, Central America, South America, the Middle East, and I've noticed on average, not everybody, but on average, countries that are first world tend to be the least grateful, and they tend to be the most almost bitter compared to like third world countries where they're almost like more about family, they're more about community, they're more about this like love for each other kind of
Yeah.
energy. I always found it so fascinating of like people with less tend to be maybe more, I don't want to say they're more grateful, but they're more like loving, they're more warming, they're more welcoming
Yeah.
than people who tend to have, I don't want to say too much, but a lot more than they, I don't know, have the most, because it's
Well,
interesting.
again, I'm big into storytelling, and like one story I was told recently, this is not my story. I was told this from somebody else that it taught him a lesson. And if he listens to this podcast, shout out to you because you told me a story. But he was in like Central America somewhere, and he was like with a group, and they were going through a village, and he saw dogs everywhere. And he's like, oh man, there's so many dogs, and everyone was feeding the dogs. He's like, everyone must be so happy here. There's so many dogs, you're feeding them. And he asked someone that, why are you, why is there so many dogs in this village? And they were like, oh, well, the jaguars will eat the dogs before they eat our children, so we'd like to keep the dogs around.
Oh
you know,
my god!
and it's like he just blew his mind because it's like that's what they have to think about. We're over here
Holy
like,
shit.
damn, I want the new iPhone, and these people are like, God, thank the gods I got a dog, so the jaguars eat that instead of my babies.
Holy
It's crazy.
Shit. Holy shit!
How dare we complain?
Holy shit. Dude, because I've seen some videos. I follow like Nature's Metal, those kind of channels where they just show barbaric, because it humbles you. It humbles you to see like a fucking lion taking down a gazelle and just the everything else in between. Because you're like, I'm fucking don't mean shit in a sense.
Yeah.
If I was out there, like I'd be dead in a matter of days because those things would rip the shit out of me. And so it's so fascinating that lens of like, oh, like dogs could almost be like the guardian. And I don't know if this would tie into any sort of paganistic or like ritual beliefs, but there might be something here where there's like the or the dog is the protector. Like the dog is the protector of our home, because if you don't have a dog, then your kids are going to get killed. And back in the day, if you didn't know the animalistic nature of a jaguar, or that it would take something off, or you never even seen one, you had no clue why. But if you like would associate, if I have a dog, kids stay safe. If I don't have a dog, kids die. So you like would fill in maybe this mentality that dog equals protection.
Yeah. So here's a kind of an interesting like question, to kind of build up the conversation. I'm curious to see what you think. Is when did humans start believing that we were the most superior species on the planet? Like when was that transition period? Because I really do believe, obviously there's no way we thought that forever.
It's a good question. Well, I guess the question would be top of the food chain, right?
Yeah.
I guess that would be the idea. So it would have had to been with, I would assume it would have had to been with some sort of technology.
Yeah. Because I'm sitting here throwing a spear at a jaguar. It's still probably gonna
kill me. I'm just hoping my buddy can kill it so he has some food.
Right. Yeah. Like, hey man, like your wife's great. I'm dying for you.
Yeah. If I go down, you got to live for the both of us.
Yeah. Wear the jaguar's skin as your own.
Yeah.
But that right there is actually, I think, one of the reasons we have a lot of pagan things, because you're out, I'll use it in the Germanic setting. You have wolves and bears and all these things, and you have a pack of wolves harassing your village, which is a very likely scenario, and you have to go kill them. And so you go out there with a band of your close hunters, and you go out to kill these wolves, and some of your guys aren't coming back. But then you kill like the wolf, and then you wear the pelt of that wolf, and then you have a story and a symbology behind it. And so there's becoming mythology and folklore around this very small interaction in the grand scheme of humanity. But at the same time, it had spiritual significance to those people because they overcame something like that. And then those stories get passed down for generations and generations and generations. And now all of a sudden we have stories of wolf warriors that could transform into wolves, when it might have started just simply as someone killing a wolf to protect their family.
Dude, that's so true.
I feel like we need to have some weed here. Be like,
if you can toss me some through the internet, I'm down.
Oh, dude, I think I got some around here somewhere.
Next one, when we do it in person. But let me think about this, because I like your train of thought though. It's like, when did humans consider ourselves the apex predators? Like, when did we determine that we were at the top of the food chain? And it's interesting because it makes me think it has to do something with environment, right? Because if we're in the middle of a city downtown, no lion's going to make it to the middle of the city. Like, it'll be killed by someone, police or whatever. Like, it's just not going to make it. It'll be smart enough to not even enter. But if we're in the middle of Africa, then I am not the fucking top of the food chain. If I'm middle,
we still are not the top of the food
chain. Yeah, right. And like, even if I'm in the middle of the ocean, right? Like think about it. If a whale fucking knew what it could do to a boat, we're not the top of the food chain. It could easily tip over the boat. Sharks could come, kill us, eat us. So that's interesting. I guess it's environment, right? It's like,
yeah,
it would have been whenever we would have been able to cultivate an environment that would have put us at the top. Because the environment matters, right? If you're in the middle of downtown, top. If you're in the middle
Yeah.
of Africa, if you're in the middle of the ocean, you're somewhere near the bottom, maybe the middle,
Yeah.
like you get fucked up pretty easily. And I don't know, man, because even, you look in LA, there's coyotes that roam around out there. You
Yeah.
have bear attacks and,
Well, we saw during COVID, like the return of a lot of natural things as people were like locked inside and nature was allowed to kind of take back a little bit. I saw endless stories about nature taking back cities because we stopped using them so much.
Like what? Can you elaborate on that?
Like I know they were seeing like in the canals of Venice, like more and more like actual like marine life returning to the
Oh, I
canals
did
of
see that.
Venice. There was stories of bear returning to larger cities. Like I remember, I think it was Nashville. I think it was either Nashville or Knoxville. You don't ever see bears there. And then during lockdowns, people were having bears like harass their homes again because people weren't out, the cars weren't out, and so the bears were starting to come back into the cities. And that's actually a big problem here in Kentucky. One of my good friends used to work for the wildlife management, and the bear population. If they're not in check, they will come into the cities again. And so you start having our systems that we take for granted start to fall apart. It doesn't take long for nature to start overtaking us once again.
Fuck. It's a good point, man.
Bro.
Might need to do a version of this podcast where we just smoke weed and just talk about the shit.
This is total tangent, but one of my favorite podcasts is I love the show Always Sunny in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
And they have like their own podcast, and like one episode all they did was just get trash drunk. Like it just needed to like to descent into madness by the end as they're just like laying on the couch with the microphones.
It's a good idea. There was one podcast I did early on that was like me and the guest took shrooms, so that was a cool one.
Oh yeah,
just microdose, didn't do like anything crazy. That was a fun episode. Episode 14, if you're listening, you want to find out. But yeah, man, it's a fascinating thing. It's really a fascinating, at least thought experiment into like, and then what brings the question into, well, let me finish that thought, which was into like this idea of like being the top of the food chain and nature. And it really begs the question, in my opinion, not to make it political, but kind of like the whole, idea around climate change and caring about nature, which don't get me wrong, I'm all for, but it's like there's this level of understanding ourselves, and maybe we can tie this back into paganism. It's like there's this level of understanding ourselves and the way that we work within nature to actually kind of create that harmonious balance that we can thrive, and we can also have like a thriving nature as well, because I think the loudest people in the room tend to be the people who are like, we're going to be underwater in 5 years, or it's not happening at all. And
right.
then in reality, I think we need to find this like middle ground of like, okay, like for every time I do this, we need to off balance it with this or something, or like, because we can't just have jaguars running around downtown New York because
right, yeah,
absolute madness would ensue.
Well, so I think if you've never done any research into the country of Estonia, I highly recommend it. It's actually on my travel list. I really want to go. So it's an ex-Soviet Union country, which right now is a little terrifying because it is right next to Russia. But it's, so I hope the best for them. But I know a few people there. And their culture to me is like so fascinating because they're actually in a reforestation era. And so a lot of people, they've kind of unconsciously decided to move into the cities. Like, no, humans belong in the city, but otherwise let nature take over. And so I think it's like 60% of their forests have actually been added in the last like 50 or 60 years or something like that. I don't know the exact statistic. And they actually have made it so there's Wi-Fi almost available to everyone everywhere around the country. And most of the country is forest now. And then everyone lives in the major cities, and then you just have endless forest around you. But it's also one of the most technically advanced countries in Europe. They went from ex-Soviet state in 1993 or 94 to now being one of the biggest like hubs for technology in the Slavic nations or in the Baltic nations. And so they've done a lot. And also, interestingly enough, most of the people there do not follow like the big five religions. I think only 20% of the country is Christian.
Okay.
And then it's hard. I don't think they actually do a full like statistic on how many people are like first religions or pagan religions, but I think it's somewhere like when I was looking it up, it's like 20 to 30% of the country actually declare themselves like following the ancient traditions there. And so it's like this weird like ex-Soviet like forest utopia technocratic empire, like, but also who are pagan. And I just find it absolutely fascinating that they're finding this balance of everything. But it also helps when you don't have a lot of people.
Oh, for sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
because that's another thing too that's so fascinating is that your mind can't like almost comprehend. I think it was like I forget what number it is, but it's like this 150 number where like once you get over 150 people, you kind of like lose understanding of like who the people are. Like you can only focus on 150 people, and
Hmm.
then after that, it's like hard to track in your mind. In this day and age, I mean, I'm looking at your YouTube account, you got 72,000 subscribers. And it's like, you know, fuck. Like, I think on my Instagram, it's like 120,000 or something. It's like, that's a fuck ton of people. Like,
Right.
our brains are not programmed to be able to handle that many people. And even looking at your videos, like, all your videos are easily over a couple thousand views. And it's like to even comprehend, like, talking to that many people or
So
knowing that many
I don't know
people.
if you've ever done this before, but it really fucked with me for a while. I stopped doing it. Is putting the image of viewership into like an auditorium setting.
Oh,
And so,
dude, I did do this.
dude, it completely fucked with me. I had to stop doing that. I started getting crazy anxiety because I was like, okay, each of my videos always will get at least 2,000 views, you know, and then it's anywhere plus that. And it's like, what's 2,000 every Wednesday when I drop a video? Holy shit, that's like an entire movie theater.
Bro.
Oh no, that's like 2 movie theaters. Oh my god, like that's a small stadium. Like, oh, I can't do this. Let alone, you know, I think my most popular video has like 300,000 people have watched it or something like that. And I start thinking about that. I'm like, that's an entire, like the largest stadium in North America is like 260,000.
Dude,
And, oh, oh,
dude.
oh God.
I've had I've had two videos go viral, one on TikTok, one on Instagram. One had the first one on TikTok had 2 million views, and then the one on Instagram had like 4.5 million views. Yeah. Yeah. Dude, it's insane. I was conceptualizing it with Beaver Stadium, which is in Penn State, their stadium, because it's like 100,000 people. And so every time I saw 100,000 people, I was like, oh, that's another Beaver Stadium. Oh, that's another Beaver Stadium. And you get to a point where it was like, I don't know, what's 4 million is like, that's like 40 Beaver Stadiums.
Yeah.
I'm like, dude, like that's so, like your mind just can't comprehend. And there's some people who have like 15 million followers, who have The Rock, I
Yeah.
think, has like 300 million followers on Instagram. And it's like,
Yeah.
how do you even, you can't even like conceptualize how many
Now
people that is.
we're getting into dark high thoughts now because like one of the like one of like the random things I said at one point that like I don't even think I was high when I was saying it. I was just said it and I was like, oh fuck. Is the most powerful people now have more power than anyone in the old era, like 100 years ago. Let alone like, you know, entire generations of kings and emperors and queens. You know, there's more power now in one individual than there was in an entire empire spans of human history. And that is a concept that I think is why us as a, you know, a species now are asking a lot of questions. We're going through a lot because there's so much different now than there was 100 years ago.
Mm,
And so I think that's why a lot of people bring it back to paganism, wanting to go back to the simpler times. Like maybe we're starting to ask the question of having these massive cities, these massive people with millions of followers. You know, maybe that's not actually happiness. Maybe that doesn't make us human. Maybe we're losing humanity. And so I think a lot of people are saying what actually makes us human. And then we go back to the third world countries and it's like they think humanity is family. They think it's, you know, having food on your, you know, dinner every night, you know, being able to eat, being able to stay warm. And I think, you know, me sitting here in my warmed apartment, I'm like, I want to be more thankful for what I have, and being with others who are thankful for it.
dude, it's so powerful too, because I know myself, like I do have aspirations it's weird, dude. It's so weird to talk about this too, because I try to be as transparent with it as possible. But the idea of like having aspirations that I want to affect the lives of millions. I want this podcast to open up people's eyes. I want it to help people to get a new understanding, whether it's about paganism, whether it's about Wicca, whether it's about, you know, whatever the hell
Yeah.
I decide to bring on this podcast. But it's weird because it's like I see other people's podcasts who I look up to, and I'm envious, and I get this feeling of energy and of envy and jealousy of them having millions of followers and millions of views. And it like comes back to what you're saying. It's like that instant where I'm like, dude, you got to just stop. Like you have a ton of followers, you have a ton of listeners. Like just enjoy that, just appreciate those
Yeah.
people. And it's like the absolute instant I make that change, it is crazy. Like the energy shift that I have in my body of how much more gratitude just being in love with the fact that I can sit down with you in Kentucky while I'm in Pennsylvania and
Yeah.
just have this amazing conversation. It's crazy the mind shift that and the energetic shift that it has on your body and soul for that matter.
Yeah, being a content creator in any way, it puts you through a lot. It really does.
Oh yeah.
I've been doing it for a little over 3 years now, I think, like 3.5 years, and it's just like the things that you have to go through in order to reconcile everything that happens. Again, the millions of followers, the millions of views, people and being able to interact with you. People, it really started fucking with me one day when I was sitting here. I was like, at any point, any time of the day, there is someone looking at my face. That fucked with me.
That's a weird thought too.
Yeah, and again, that wasn't a reality 100 years ago. And you
Bro,
go back to
if we ever spoke weed, let's not talk about content creation.
Oh, dude, yeah, no, it gets deep, man. It gets deep, but
Oh,
I don't even
fuck.
know where I was going with that. As far as like the shift in gratitude, shoot, we've been talking about gratitude for a while. It's very important, listeners out
Oh,
there
it
to this
is.
podcast.
Oh, they know.
It's very important.
They know.
Oh, they know.
Always
Good, good.
always gonna be reminded though.
You always got to, yeah, always be grateful, because I need to be reminded of it, because you get in the flow of work. Again, I spend most of my day looking at a computer. As much as I love being out in nature and worshiping old gods and stuff like that, I have to make content. And so I find myself, if I get into the flow of work, it feels good, but then I have to take that step back and be grateful. And once again, and look at that coffee cup and thank the 1,000 people it took to get that coffee cup in front of me.
Oh, for sure.
But the final thing I wanted, actually, before I lose this train of thought, the reason I brought up the when did humanity become like the top of the food chain in our mind, is because in ancient times, when we didn't think we were top of the food chain, or even now, did we see animals as equals or greater than us? And, in the concept of like, oh, we think now, oh, obviously we're the smartest beings on the planet, but you're sitting around a fire, wolves are howling in the distance and they're trying to eat your babies. You're not thinking about, I'm the smartest creature on the planet. You're thinking that wolf is going to kill me. And so you have to come up with a very interesting way to deal with that. And I think that's, again, why we have very dynamic and interesting gods, especially, and that's really why I love the Scandinavian and the Germanic gods, is because the environments that birthed these concepts and these deities were such harsh and dark environments. The deities that became in birth from that are so fascinating, because this is how the people had to reconcile their existence.
That makes sense, man. Well, here's a quick pivot while we're talking about gratitude and being grateful. And we started it off in the intro, but it's been a big cliffhanger, and hopefully it makes for some good content. You said
So much less interesting than I
damn.
think we've been building up.
Well, let's just build it up some more. Maybe it'll help out. But you were saying
Yeah.
that you were saying it's a miracle that you're here. So what happened that you're now thankful that you're here and grateful that you're here?
Oh, well, just being grateful for the existence of being able to do this for a living and talk on a podcast is the most grateful thing I could be for. But we do a thing every year. So we just had our first winter celebration, our first Yule event. And we did a Suna night, or a soul ritual, whatever an individual wants to call it. And what it is staying up throughout the entirety of the night with the intent of doing a ritual in the morning of gratitude for the sun, and saying, oh, I'm thankful, because our ancestors had to go through these dark nights without phones, without TV screens, with just each other, very hard to survive. And they had to do this all winter long, every single year. And we don't really think about it. We might be like, oh, it gets so dark, I'm depressed. But like, at least we're safe. These long nights were hard on people in the past. And so to give that night of, in a way, it's an offering of saying, I'm giving up my sleep to the ancestors, but also to, the powers above, and saying, I'm giving this up so I recognize and remember how dark and hard it is during this time of year. And so we do it every year. It's awful, but it's also amazing at the same time, because you have to just go around the people that you care for. We had like 40, 50 people at this event, and, we just talked. We played board games, we drank, we sang, we did the weirdest shit possible to keep each other entertained in order to make it through this long night. And, you're sitting there waiting for the sun to rise, just like curled around the fire, just like, please, sun rise. Like, you're just demanding the sun to rise so you can go to sleep for the first time. And so doing it every year is amazing. You learn a lot of lessons from it. But, I did that, got like an hour of sleep, and then went and performed. We did 3 rituals that day. I performed an Odin ritual that night, which was super intense. And then the next day, drove back to Kentucky, worked at a bar I'm working at right now, and now I'm on the podcast. So it's been a wild 24 hours, and I'm happy to be here.
That's crazy. And so there's actually probably a really strong correlation here that I'm trying to think of in my head. And it might be around the word Yule, because I
Yeah,
don't know the history of that word. And it's on the title of your book. Uh, I know there's like a Christmas song or something where it's like Yuletide givings or something like
yeah,
that. And then you've mentioned it a couple times now. And then it's also, I want to just add on top of this while I'm thinking of this whole landscape, is one of my, I love Rick and Morty. I don't know if you've seen it, the cartoon.
yeah,
So there's one episode where the kid who's like a monster and he's like growing super fast, and he's like been told the entire episode that he's not allowed to go outside or he'll die. He goes outside and he doesn't die. And so he starts going on this rampage of how everything's fake. He's like, Bush did 9/11. And then he makes a comment that is, the Christians changed the date of Jesus's birth because it fell on a pagan holiday. And then on top of this, you're talking about the sun rising. And I'm thinking about Christianity and Christ being born and rising, Christ being the son of God. And so
yeah,
I'm not sure if there's a corollary with all of this, but it feels to me like there's a connection here between like whatever Yule is, Christianity, paganism, Christmas. Is there some correlation here, or are you able to help me out with where I'm going with this?
yeah. So holidays in general are something that is, let me take a step back here. So I think the best way to start this conversation is I learned a lot when I traveled. I'm very grateful that I've done it. And learning more about like I spent most of my time in Germany and learning a lot about ancient traditions that have survived through the Christianization process. Like there is actually a lot
Mm.
that transitioned from the ancient past, from the folklore, and that was just given a new skin or renamed. And I talk about this a lot on the channel. There's so many different concepts that are actually still existing today. A lot of the times in Europe and even here in North America, that were pagan traditions. And one I just recently talked about was Krampus, like Krampus is a
We were gonna get
Catholic.
to that. I saw that.
Oh,
We're
we're
gonna
gonna
get to
talk
that.
about
Yeah,
Krampus.
yeah,
Oh,
I'll
all
get to
right,
that. I
sweet.
saw that video on your thing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But
Well,
even to add to this, I know whenever Christians overtook Egypt, they tried to integrate the Egyptian gods and be like, "Oh, like you have this god, like that's this in Christianity. So like your gods still agree with us, because so you should just agree with Christianity because your gods will love you for,
right.
yeah, you'll still be
Look no
cool."
look no further than our days of the week, even in English. Thursday, and
Really?
in Germany. Yeah, no. The reason Thursday is because it's Thursday.
No shit.
And then I can't believe you didn't know this, man.
Dude,
Okay,
give me it all, man.
so a
I
lot
don't
of
know
the
these
they
things.
so I can't remember, like I'm not gonna be able to get all of them off the top of my head, but I know Monday is Mani's day, Tuesday is Tyr's day, Wednesday is Woden's day, Thursday is Thor's day, and I this is one I always get mixed up. Friday is, I think it's Frigg's day, but I think it also is Freya's day. I could be wrong on that. Don't crucify me, pagans out there. And then I think the
Pun
only ones that are
intended.
different. Yeah, right. And then Saturday and Sunday, I think, are the ones that got added later. But yeah, in
Wait, so
Germany
these were,
today,
so real quick, these were all the namings of pagans, like the pagan, that was the name that the pagans had placed on these days of the week, and then it was
yeah,
just switched, or like
yeah,
just,
then well, it never changed.
oh,
Um,
okay, gotcha.
yeah, so it continued on. In Germany,
The
this is
name
my
just changed because of going to English, right? From
yeah,
whatever.
it's
Okay,
a transition over to
gotcha,
English.
gotcha.
But they're Germanic in origin because you have the Anglo-Saxon as well. So you have the German origin in the UK, whatnot, into the English language. But even in Germany today, like the name for Thursday is Donnerstag, which Donar is the Germanic name for Thor. And so anytime it was Thursday there, I was like, Happy Donnerstag. It was just really cool. I was like, your name of the week is literally Donar. I love that. And so you see that everywhere though. Like there's so many, like I put it on my Instagram when I was there, but there's a temple. I think it was a temple to St. Peter built in the middle of Munich, Germany. And there's a problem there where it gets struck by lightning all the time. Like just it constantly gets struck by lightning. And they did some research in it, and apparently there's a spring under it that actually attracts the lightning to it. And so that's why it constantly gets struck. And
Mm,
when I did further digging, that was an ancient site for Donar or Thor worship,
another pun?
which
Was that another pun there? Deeper
what was it?
digging. You did
Deeper digging? No, I tell you, man, I'm training to be a dad. I want to be a dad real bad, and I figured I'd just do the puns right away. This is part of it.
I love it. Keep them
Uh,
coming.
right. So yeah, and so finding out that this church was built on an ancient Thor site, and so there's just so much evidence of that sprinkled everywhere. Like there was a sea called the Ostara Seas, the Ostara Zine. And there's this like, this beautiful springs and, everyone, there was like a nude beach there. And it's like all the culture there still seemed to be around spring. But it was called after the Germanic goddess of spring. And it's all these things that you can't write a book on, but it's just sprinkled everywhere. And that's even more true when we're talking about Yule and the holidays. It's even more evident of humans have always venerated, and celebrated life at very specific times of the year. And when Christianity came in, this kind of replaced those holidays that already existed. A good example, actually, even more so, as I just mentioned her, is Easter, Ostara. Easter is, or Eostre, is just a replacement for the pagan festival of spring.
Wow. Fuck, man. I mean, it's crazy, because going back, connecting this to our content creation, I very much, had this mentality like there's no such thing as an original idea, but now it's feeling like there's no such thing as an original ideology or religion. They're just taking these things. So, but we got a little bit, I think, maybe off track. I wanted to bring this back. Let's bring this back to the connection with Yule, with Christianity, with like maybe the winter solstice, because I know that's around the same time. What was maybe that based off of in paganism and history there?
Well, so again, I just want to remind everyone, I'm not a historian. This is based on my research and understanding. But traditionally, the actual date for Yule was the first full moon after the winter solstice, because the Germanic and Scandinavian people followed a lunar cycle, which made a lot of sense because, they were much more driven by the darker months. And so following a lunar cycle rather than a solar cycle just made sense. And so everything was based on the next full moon rising. And so the actual celebration of Yule is the first full moon after the winter solstice. Now, the winter solstice and the summer solstice, like there's still elements all around Germanic and Scandinavian regions that align with the solstices and equinoxes, just as we see everywhere around the world. And I think that's just, it's kind of crazy to really think about, like, how did these people know that these were important dates?
Right.
Of like watching the sun rise and fall. And then they observed, okay, this is when it's at its lowest and this is when it starts rising again. They didn't have the equipment to study these things, and yet they still saw them as important enough to literally build structures and monuments to these things. And so we see the ancient peoples building and venerating and doing all these things to celebrate these times of year. And so it's only natural that at our root and foundation, these things continue to grow. And so, yes, we celebrate Christmas. Most people celebrate Christmas in the West on the 25th. It's very close to the 21st, which is the winter solstice. So to me, it just all correlates and makes sense as the natural evolution of human culture.
I was looking up when the first full moon is after the summer solstice, and it looks like it's actually doesn't fall until 2023, because I think the winter solstice. The winter solstice.
Oh yeah, no, the official day of Yule is like January 9th or something like that.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's what it kind of looks like here.
As I said at the very beginning, I'm not very big on labels, man. So at the same day, I'm not really big. I don't think yes, there can be like a big effect from doing it on a full moon, doing it on a historical day. But let me tell you, I just celebrated Yule on, December 13th through the 15th or whatever it was, and had an amazing time. And it was still spiritual. The gods were with us. The spirits of the woods were there. We had so many signs and acceptance that it doesn't have to be necessarily on that date to still venerate it. However, many people still choose to venerate historically on the historic days.
So then is Yule so maybe I might have missed this, but Yule's the pagan version of Christianity or Christmas then? Or like, is that the same?
Slightly. So this is where we get into the difference of religion versus culture.
Okay.
So the religious reasons that this holiday, with the things you do on this holiday versus the cultural stuff, is different everywhere you go. And Krampus is one of those things. Krampus is very much limited, at least historically, to the Alpine region. And now everyone has very similar beings. Like you go to the Netherlands, and then if you ever want to go down a weird road, look up Sparta Pete and Sinterklaas.
Sparta Pete. How do you spell that?
Sparta Pete. It's like SVARTE and then PIETE. If you Google search it right now, you'll be like, oh. So it's a whole thing. I don't have time to get into it. And I don't know enough about it to really get into it. There's a very a big debate on it right now.
Okay, we'll save that for next time.
Yeah. And I'm not Dutch, so I don't really want to add too much to the conversation. But Sparta Pete is very similar to Krampus in the sense that it's a mischievous being that punishes children during this time of year. And so that's what I really like to look into, is the commonalities between culture, not necessarily the individual details. It's like, okay, so we all seem to believe and agree that there's a, evil being that punishes bad children. That's a cultural thing. Now, there could have been a
Are those the
religious reason.
Jaguars? Could those be the
Jaguars,
Jaguars?
hey, it could have been,
That
might
might
have
be the
been.
Jaguars.
They stole the children away.
Oof.
Like, oh
Did
yeah.
we just figure it out? Someone call up historians. Maybe we figured it out.
Damn. But it's the same deal. So, like, I asked the question of why did we do these things? Why do we believe there's evil beings that take away children? Well, maybe it's because children, quite simply, are dumb and they run into the forest at night and die. And so, like, you tell your children, like, hey, when it's dark outside, don't go out. And they're like, screw you, Dad. And they're going to do it anyways. And so you're like, hey, don't go into the woods at night or fucking Krampus is going to kill you. They're going to be like, oh my God. So, like, you have to create these elements. And so I consider that a little bit more cultural necessarily than religious.
Well, real quick, because this is something that came up, not my last podcast, but the two before that, where this idea of using fear to manipulate action was something that came up. And it was something that like really kind of was weird for me. And maybe this is a good thing to talk about, where like they were talking about how like if utilizing fear to not do something like I want to make you afraid of, in this case, going into the woods so that you don't actually go out and die for yourself. And I found it so fascinating because I don't know where I still sit on this idea, because there's a part of me where, I've been, kind of scared into not doing things. Like, let's say it's talking up against the teacher. It's like, well, then you'll go to detention or timeout. And there's a part of me that like thinks that there has to be a way for us to actually transition to a more maybe loving or engaging route, where it's more of along the lines of, well, let me like sit down and explain to you why you don't go out into the woods at night. But it's interesting because if you tell someone not to do something, it's like the first thing that they want to do. It's like, I want to go and test this and make sure that you're telling me the truth. But if it comes to life and death, I mean, that's pretty final and not something you can really just test out. So I don't know, like, have you found in your life areas where you have tested this idea of like, I'm going to make myself afraid to do something, as opposed to like just kind of embracing like the love or compassion for actually doing that thing? Does that kind of make sense where I'm going with that?
A little. I don't know if necessarily I can answer it specifically within my life, but again, with the Krampus thing and whatnot, I guess the question we have to ask, is it effective, in what it needs to do? Because at the end of the day, if your children are running into the woods and dying, you don't want that. And so you could try the loving example and say, oh, there's Santa Claus here, there's Sinterklaas here, he's going to give you gifts, he's going to make you a good boy, you're a good boy or a good girl, you're going to get things this year. So encouraging good behavior, that loving side. But that clearly wasn't enough, because then they had to be like, no, Krampus is going to kill you if you go in the woods, don't do that.
Interesting. Okay, well, let's.
So I think there is balance in everything, and I
it's a good point.
I think for everything we see like Krampus, we have the balance in that of something like Santa Claus or Sinterklaas.
Well, let's talk about Krampus for a bit, because my history with it, there is a show. I guess I don't know if they're still making episodes, but it was called The League on FX, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but it was like about fantasy football.
About it,
it was like a comedy, so funny. And one of the characters, who like is basically the stoner of the group, who was always getting high and like doing stuff, he brought up Krampus. He like kind of like went to the local mall and was like, oh, he's like, I see you have Santa Claus, like, where's your Krampus, and they're like, what the fuck are you talking about, dude? Like, get the fuck out of here. And he's like, oh, okay. Like, it was like, he like went and bought like a Krampus outfit or something. He was like, all right, I'll be the Krampus. And then he's running around through the mall in this like Krampus outfit, like scaring kids and like terrorizing them. And like, and I never knew what the fuck Krampus was. And then I think like a year or two after that, there was actually a movie that came out that was called Krampus. And I think that was probably the first time that it got like wide stream attention. I don't think the movie was that good from what I remember. But so help me out here. Like, what, it clearly has something to do with going in the woods. Is this something that like was started from like a pagan, time frame back in the day, or like what's the history of Krampus?
So most people accept that it's a pagan tradition, because it depends. Like, many people claim to be the first people to create Krampus or where Krampus originates, but we really don't know. because when the only written source material, I think it was in the 1400s, don't quote me on that, but the written source material was observing a Krampusnacht, an actual Krampus celebration. So it was someone saying, hey, I witnessed this. So it was already happening. And we don't know to what extent and how far it went back.
And that was in the
So
1400s, you said?
yeah, 14 or 1500, something like that. So, and clearly these people would have been Christian, but they were celebrating this Krampusnacht thing. But when you even ask people today, like I saw like an interview, I think it was like the New York Times did an article on Krampus at some point, and they were in like the Czech Republic, I believe, and they were talking about it. And people there are like, yeah, it's probably pagan, but like we don't even think about it. And I observed that in a lot of things. Like actually, I got invited to go to a Dionysus festival in Greece. And they're like, yeah, it's not a religious thing, but they wear masks, they put on robes, they sing to Dionysus, and they give offerings and pour out wine. I'm like, sounds like to me you're worshiping Dionysus, but they don't even think about it. They're like, no, it's just our cultural thing. And yet these people are still all Christian. And so I think there is an understanding that it's probably a pagan thing in origin, but it's a cultural thing to them now. Because I think the majority of people participating in Krampusnacht are just there to dress up, drink schnapps, and have a good time. But there is an understanding that like it's part of their culture, but it's probably not Christian.
So, okay, so it's probably part of their culture. So then what? Oh, see, it's weird because I guess you can't really like go into the history of it then because we don't really know. And it seems like to be
We
a
just know
lot
it
of
existed.
things. Seems like a lot of things with paganism where it's like we don't know like the origin of it. We just know that it's a thing. We just know that it exists.
Maybe I can bring in my own philosophy of thing. Again, I'm not a historian. I'm an art student. But my philosophy and how I perform ritual and how I connect to the gods and all these things is I see these elements from the past. And I'm like, let's bring them into a ritual atmosphere. Let's actually bring the religious side to them and see what happens. So with Krampus, since I was doing research on him this year, I for our Yule gathering this year, before we did the long night of staying up, I gave an offering of schnapps to Krampus. Because I was sitting here like, okay, he's mischievous presence, the mischievous winter presence, and we know historically that people give him schnapps to make him stay away. And one of the things that people do now is they'll go cause mischief somewhere. They'll like they have these little whips and then whip people. And in order to make them go away, you have to give them a drink. And traditionally, you give them schnapps. And so I was like, okay, why do they do schnapps? Well, I'm going to give an offering of schnapps to this fire. Say it's for Krampus and say keep mischief away. And we had a wonderful night. Nothing bad happened. And can I say 100% that my schnapps made Krampus stay away? No. But at the same time, I'm bringing more of that religious component of it, of saying like, okay, Krampus is mischief. Schnapps are the way to keep him away. Let's see what happens.
That's interesting. What do you do with the schnapps? Do you just kind of like pour it out, or do you just like do you drink it later?
The best way I prefer to do any kind of offering to a deity is either to burn it or bury it. Now that's not always possible, especially if you live in a city. And so I tell people at best, just pour out a drink around a tree or on a rock or something like that. But at a ritual, like the one we have in our events, we always have a ritual fire. And that fire is how we send the gifts to the gods, whatever beings we do. So, pouring alcohol into a fire is just a lot
of fun. Be careful. Don't do it inside your house.
We blew up a whole pallet this weekend. It was great.
Oh, geez. Hopefully you had space for that.
Yeah, we got I was a little close, but I still have my hair. So
you still got your eyebrows. So that's all that's important. It's interesting too, the idea of offering, because you did a video on the Celtic paganism. And what really drew me to it, well, for a little bit of background, I gravitated towards like, okay, what's going on with paganism? Why do I feel like it's this muddy thing? Where's this coming from? And it was interesting because I was drawn to the Celtic one. And I believe I put this in the comments of that video, and the podcast listeners know this, that I have a past life, like, and I don't remember where you said you stood on it, but from my understanding, I have a past life of being in the Celtics. It would have probably been like in the 1700s was whenever I was told. And it was interesting because there was a lot of like warrior energy with this. But the reason that your video stood out to me was because you were actually at I believe it was, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but actually at a offering area for a Celtic god. And all you needed to do was like basically place, I think, like a sugar cube kind of like in there in this like little nook and cranny. And I remember watching you do that, and I was like overwhelmed with kind of like this emotional discharge of kind of like crying, like tears were coming to me. And it was like this really bizarre, like kind of remembrance, or like, holy shit, like I appreciate kind of what you were doing. It was like this weird thing. I don't remember exactly what my comment was,
Yeah.
but it was like a very interesting kind of thing. So do you see comments like that frequently, or is that like something that's kind of out of the blue for you?
I wouldn't do this if I didn't see comments like that frequently.
Yeah.
And I always say, like, our events, we have quite a few events every year. I think this year we've had 23 events with our community. We've been doing them for around just north of 2 years now. I think we're coming in on our third year of putting on these pagan gatherings. And every single time people come up and they're like, thank you so much. This is the most transformative weekend of my life. I always needed this. And a lot of the times when I perform a ritual, I don't get an experience out of it because I'm worried about the actual performance of the ritual. And so actually, like, pouring an offering into a fire or doing something to dedicate, this ritual to a deity, I'm like, oh, I hope it worked. And then people come up and they're like, oh my God, I just had an amazing experience with Odin. Thank you so much. Like, this is exactly what I needed. And so it's through those experiences that I'm like, we're doing the right thing. Like, okay, I'm using these elements that we know to invoke this being, and we're using this as an offering to connect with them, and people are getting experiences out of them. To me, that is the perfect relationship of religion and what we're trying to do here. And it's definitely less so through videos because it definitely helps when you're in person. But the reason I started my YouTube was because I was so tired of seeing people talk about paganism and not show me what it was. They'd sit in their office, they would be like, here is a book, here is a piece of paper. And I'm like, well, how do I do it? They would tell me how to do it, but they wouldn't actually show me how you do it. And so that was one of the things I started my YouTube for. Is I pride myself on, I'm one of the few, if not the only, pagan YouTuber that actually shows you my religious practice, shows you the rituals, takes you there with me. And continually, I do it because people are like, thank you, I experienced something. And if that helps people, I will continue to do it.
It's crazy, man. I mean, I know it helped me for sure, which is not something I thought was going to happen whenever I went into that video.
Well, I will expand on that. So the area I was at was a place called the Corrimony Cairn. And so it's only called that because it's in Corrimony, Scotland. And so we don't actually know that much about it. It's a 4,500-year-old burial mound from dating. It's a chambered mound, which means you can crawl through a tunnel, and then it has an opening on the top. It's in the series of clava cairns, which are a very famous like cairn system, like, stone structure. And so its name is only its literal identification. But there I was looking at it, and one of the few things we know about it is there was a singular woman buried there, which was already kind of impressive because it was very big. So it's like, this had to be an important person, a very important woman. And there's red quartz throughout it as well, which is rare, like, in the sense that not every burial mound was used red quartz, and it was very specific in how it was used. And so the theory behind it is that this woman was a, like, spiritual woman, which she was either like a seeress or, just a priestess of some kind. But we have no remains of her body. Like, her body was nothing more than an oil stain on the ground when they opened it, because of how old this thing was. And so, going in there, yeah, okay, these things about it. What does it feel like? And let me tell you, that thing felt crazy. Like, the energy of that place was out of this world. I actually laid down into it, like where she laid, and just like kind of went into like a meditation. And you can just feel the presence of this woman. Like, I'm actually getting chills thinking about
I'm
it.
feeling it. I'm feeling it as you're talking about
And
it.
so when talking about and sitting there recording a video, I was like, I have to give an offering. And so, just dropping that into the wall and saying, thank you for allowing me to experience this, and acknowledging the presence that is there. That is, to me, what it's all about.
Dude, I'm
And,
tearing
to be
up right
able
now as you're talking
yeah,
about this. This is weird.
uh, yeah, and we actually took that into a ritual this year. So Kevin, who was there with me, who has a really close connection to Scotland, knows the Scottish heritage and all this stuff. We built a burial mound out of wood, and we performed a ritual in it and called to her to call her to the States. We did it in Kentucky. And I sat in the burial mound and allowed people to put offerings into the ground, and then we buried it for her once again. And so those, you're not going to read that in a book. You're not going to read that in the Poetic Edda. You're not going to read that in a history book. That's just something that we're like, we want to honor this. We don't want to honor her. Let's continue to build. Let's create new stories. And that's really my main philosophy behind what I do.
That's cool, man. Yeah, it's so wild to me because I had a very strong connection to like science growing up. Like, I was very logically minded. If you can't physically show me something, it doesn't exist. I went into computer engineering, so like math, science, physics. I get that stuff. It's like second nature to me. And it's so weird stepping into this new world of things that you can feel their truth. You can feel the resonance of the information. I mean, even when you're showing some videos, you were talking about different sites, seeing the rocks, the way they're laid out. You were talking about I think you were talking about in a different video, maybe it was the same video, about certain stones that, they were anointing kings, or where blood would have been spilled for a sacrifice. And it's so fascinating to me at this point because there's so much just energetic truth behind just what feels right. It just feels like it's true. Even this getting emotional over something that I wasn't even there, and I'm feeling it off of how you're saying it,
Yeah.
how you're presenting it. I was seeing it in the video, feeling that emotion. And it's so weird of how it's not weird. I guess it's weird. It's different.
It's weird in the sense that it's new. I would try to say, I guess.
Yeah, it's weird in the sense of trying to mesh it with the science or scientific understanding, and
Yeah.
this scientific world that it feels like has a grip over the Western ideology and the Western world,
Yeah.
and trying to sit here and think of how we're able to bridge this gap between this almost new age of thinking and this old age of spirituality. I mean, like, it's weird because, like, in my mind, whenever I say I'm spiritual, it feels like this overarching kind of how, like, whenever you're saying paganism, but then there's like Nordic, there's Norse, like all this stuff.
You're right.
To me, when I say spiritual, it feels like pagan like fits into that mold somehow of like there's like, okay, truth in this, and it kind of like is a part of the
Well,
same.
and I would even say like in a term spiritual, and I typically say spirituality versus religion because I see it as the understanding of spirit, that the idea that there is something that is spirit and we can interact with it. And I think that's a very simple but very true term.
Yeah, I would agree with you in that sense as well. But it's interesting because I feel like Christianity kind of believes in that at some level, but at another level, maybe not. And maybe I'm getting on a topic we maybe should just avoid because of just not knowing what I'm talking about.
Well, I think I can add to that a little bit. So
Please
I
do.
do think just because, I'm a pagan, and again, like I said, just because I know there's a very complicated past and a very violent past when it comes to the relationship between Christianity and pagan religions, even up through the creation of North America. Christianity came in and overtook the original religions here, 200 years ago. Uh, and yet I don't hate Christians. I don't hate people who choose to follow Christianity. I don't like being, trying to be converted. I don't like, ignorance. But my uncle is a great example. He's a Christian, but he's the first person I told about my spiritual journey because he's an old school hippie man. Like, let me tell you, he's got the big beard, the circle glasses. Like, he smoked more weed than I think has ever actually existed. But he's still a Christian, and he lives at his little cottage in the woods, and he takes care of animals. He takes care of the forest, and he sees himself very much as the shepherd of like taking care of the flock. And he works at a farm. The man is 65 years old, still works at a farm, takes care of cows. And that's how he connects to God, to his version of God, to his version of Jesus. He hasn't gone to, I haven't seen him step in a church probably in 20 years. And he doesn't need it. He doesn't need the organized religion aspect to still be a Christian in his heart. And I really respect that.
Well, that's what's so interesting about it, right? Is I don't know what I'm trying to go at with this. I guess I was trying to kind of articulate the difference between like science and right, because we almost like create these divisions between science, between religion, between spirituality. And to me, it feels as though like the deepest truth would be the center of the Venn diagram that brings all of those together in a sense, right? And it- and it's weird because even on this journey I've had, it seems like there's things that certain people hold as being truth that other people are like, yeah, you don't really need that. You don't really need to do that. You don't blah blah blah. You know what I mean? Versus versus what? I don't know that it needs to really be against anything. Oh, versus I guess getting into this more mindset of like, well, science is all that we can physically and tangibly prove, so that's all that's real. And it's just fascinating to me of like this process of really asking more questions. And I mean, I know scientists were trying to talk to a few that are actually like starting to prove like telepathy, and they're starting to prove like all of these like otherworldly powers, for lack of a better word, that exists and are tangible within our three-dimensional space-time continuum
Yeah.
that for some reason we've become divorced from. We've almost become more set on understanding the physical world and trying to explain everything from that nature. And yet the more we dive into it, like quantum mechanics and quantum physics is a perfect example, the more we understand about it, the less we understand about reality. And so it's like this very fascinating dance or play that seems to be in motion where the more we try to understand the physical world, the less we actually understand it.
Yeah, no, I feel you, and and again, these are great high thoughts and high
Yeah.
conversation. Uh, and like one of the things, I don't know if we were talking about it in our initial like conversation, but one of the things that I always talk about with people is understanding what is deity, what is God, what is the goddess, what are the deities of the world, what is spirit. And what I always go to is our interaction with the sun on a daily basis, and the sun as like one of the first deities we can recognize, because the sun provides us something. It provides us warmth. It is a giant ball of energy that floats around us all the time. We float around it. The relationship between our planet and that, those are things our ancestors didn't understand, but they understood the relationship between themselves and the sun because they knew that grew their food. They knew it kept them warm. They felt it on their face. They felt they could see the light. They understood and they missed it when it disappeared. And our understanding scientifically of our relationship between us and the sun only further builds our relationship with the sun as a deity, in my opinion.
Right. Well, and I think this might be an interesting point to bring up, right? Is like the terminology, because this is how this conversation started, was around terminology. The terminology around the word God or gods. And it feels to me like this word has shifted so dramatically throughout the course of human history, and maybe even more so into recent human history, where, I've always looked at like the Roman or Greek mythology around the word God, and they almost, in my opinion, not non-professional historian opinion, is that they seem to have been using the word to describe a metaphysical energy that we all can interact with. And I point this out because they would say things like the god of war, the god of love, the god of mischief, the god of evil, or the god of,
Yeah,
all these different gods. And it's like, it's not, you know and it's not that they were trying to say that there's a person named, I don't know why Cupid keeps coming up, but this person named Cupid who is actually in charge of the energy of love. But it comes back to the storytelling where it's like, okay, the story of love is best embodied by Cupid, who did this, this, and this. And they saw
yeah,
their shortcomings here, and they saw, they then, oh wow, this is weird. They then lay out like the yin and yang of the energy of what made Cupid, what was yin of Cupid and what was the yang, and we put that into a story. And that's kind of how we have agreed that this personification of the energy of love is Cupid, and we'll just label that as being God in an instance, as
yeah,
opposed to this. I don't know. I just find it so interesting how it's almost like, it was energy, and then almost dogmatic Christianity believed that it was actually a dude sitting in a cloud, or somehow our
yeah.
minds, like somehow culture attached to this idea that it was a god sitting in clouds. And now it's almost like we're scrambling for it, trying to figure out what it actually is. But luckily, I think luckily there's people like us who are trying to explore that at a deeper level.
Yeah. Well, and I think the resources we have, our
Oh yeah.
ability to have this conversation allows us to do so much more than the people exploring these concepts in the ancient past were able to do. Like I think all the time, all the amazing conversations I've got to have with people around the world that I would never have had if it wasn't for technology. And so, using technology in the sense of networking and increasing our understanding is one of the best benefits it comes from. Obviously there's the darker side, there's the obsession, there's the overusage, there's all the control that people assert onto us through technology. But if we can continue to use it as a tool to communicate effectively about these larger concepts, we're only going to continue to grow in depth and exploration into them.
Yeah. So then how do you, because it's interesting, right? Because as you were talking about with like paganism, they didn't write down a lot of these things. So how are you going about like expanding your breadth of knowledge with different pagan ideas and traditions and ceremonies to integrate that into your everyday life?
Yeah, so I think again I'll go to this transitional period I've had recently with me traveling abroad for the first time, and I think it came at a very good time because I was getting to the exertion point of research. I have four different versions of the Norse stories. I have them in the original Old Norse. I have several different translations. I've tried to translate it myself. I've translated into different languages to get different ideas, and so it's like the end of the day, I'm sitting here, there's only so much this can do for me in the connection department. What I need to do is actually get out there. And so when I traveled and I went to these ancient sites, I would just sit in them and I would think, okay, let me go into the mindset of someone venerating deity, venerating gods. And why did they use this site? Why was it sacred to them? And I would sit there and I would absorb it and I would think about it and I would play around with the concepts that they were playing around with. And so now here back in Kentucky, in good old my Kentucky home, I have to take those things that I've learned and bring them to my daily life. And, I don't know if I can pinpoint an exact situation of that besides like the burial mound that I shared with you already of, giving an offering, a simple offering there, and then coming here and calling to it once again. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that answers the question. That's just what I was compelled to say.
It seems like, I mean, you kind of have to just go to those places and almost conduct your own research, kind of you have like this base level of knowledge.
You gotta feel it.
Yeah. And I feel like that's where it gets tricky for people. I feel like that's maybe not the listeners of this, audience, but maybe and I'm probably bringing this up because I'm trying to expand, the brand and the awareness, is that, to help other people maybe evolve their level of understanding of trying to feel into that energy, like feeling into like what feels like a deeper, more real, more tangible truth. It seems like there's something there with the idea of like feeling into it, right? You travel to all these different places and ask people, well, what did they do here? And you feel into it. You're like, okay, this person said this, that person said that, based on my past understanding and the 3 years of knowledge I've done into Norse paganism. Like, does that make sense? Does this make more sense? What does it look like? Does this look like somewhere that they would have, made a sacrifice? What was this actually going and laying where the body is?
And I think maybe something I can add here is one of the things I think here we do in the States, and especially with media, is we oversaturate our expectations of what religion can be or what our relationship with the gods can be, or just spirit in general. And we get these big grandiose ideas, with Norse paganism. I know people always think of the Vikings, they think about Valhalla, they think of the fjords, they think of, the Northern Lights, and they get this big concept of what it needs to be. But what I learned when traveling is it's not actually that. Some of the most sacred sites I was in was a muddy hole. I was like, there was an area that was actually still maintained by a religious person. It was like a vulva is like the Scandinavian term for like a priestess. And so there was an actual vulva from Denmark that maintained this like bog, and she gave offerings there and performed rituals there. And I got to go into it. And let me tell you, it looks like a small little area. It was a boggy hole. There was some mud. There was mosquitoes. It was kind of hot. It was kind of gross, but there was bones and artifacts hanging everywhere. That site necessarily could be found anywhere in the world. It doesn't have to be this big, grandiose idea for it to be sacred. And I think that's one of the things I really came away from is of waking up and realizing it doesn't need to be this big thing. It can be a little tiny altar behind a house. It can be a small little stack of stones in the woods that you know of, for you to actually call something sacred.
Yeah, that is crazy. The things that you could actually label as being sacred versus non-sacred.
Yeah.
That's cool. What I'm looking at your YouTube over here. What are like some examples of like it says like what clothing penguins should wear? Like what goes on in that? Is it like where it's like sourced from or like where it comes from?
So I guess like a lot of the times my videos come from, debates I see. So a lot of times I'll post a picture of like one of our events and, and I have a very specific way I dress for those events. And people are like, oh, why are you dressed like that? Oh, you're LARPing. Oh, you're just making this up, and stuff like that. And so I'm like, oh, I need to make a video discussing why I wear these clothing. And so a lot of the times my videos are reactions to things that I see people questioning. And so I go through in that video. This is why I wear this visor. This is why I have feathers on the visor. This is why I have rabbit fur. This is why I have a drum. And so I try to clear the air on questions people may have.
Gotcha. So what is because it is a pretty wild outfit. And I think you actually sent me this picture in regards to whenever I asked you for like the photos.
Oh yeah. I never actually sent you a face shot. I don't have any face shots.
You don't have any face shots? I mean, this stuff's pretty cool. Like if you had a face shot with you wearing this stuff,
cool. That's my cool.
I mean, maybe we'll just throw this up as the thumbnail for it. But what's going on here? I mean, you got it. It seems to me, if I was going to be on the far what if I was going to be mischievous and try to poke holes and make a huge deal of it, it seems like an Indian kind of wardrobe, and I could see people being like, oh, he's appropriating like Indian culture, but obviously you're not doing that. So what's going on here with like this like dream catcher drum type thing and like the hair, the feathers on the headband? Like what is all that?
So, a lot of this comes from shamanic practice. And so, a lot of people may say like their only knowledge of shamanism is Native American. And so
Mm.
when you go into say, oh, the appropriating Native American culture, it's usually people that don't understand that shamanism and the practice of shamanism is a global tradition. Now, that's no disrespect to the people and individuals that practice it still. Like we need more recognition of the people that still practice as shamans because it's a dying art form that is very, very beautiful. But when you study it and you look at it, you see that there's so many connections to why they do the things they do. And a lot of the things that I actually have within my own ritual department are, things that I just came to my own conclusion of. And I added to myself, I'm like, oh, I need this visor to cover my eyes so the spirits don't get in my eyes. And then you start doing research into African shamanism, they wear masks so the spirits don't get into their eyes. You start
Mm.
researching Peruvian shamanism. Oh, we wear, I forget exactly what they wear. They wear something to cover the eyes because the eyes are the key to the soul. And so if you don't want evil spirits getting into your eyes, you cover them. And so I came to that conclusion myself, but learning from other cultures, realized that they do it as well. And same thing with feathers. I recently discovered the Siberian tradition of shamanism. They put feathers on their headdress because they believe that in order to fly to the spirit world, you have to have feathers to fly, like birds. I wear
Uh,
them because I have a connection to turkeys as like my own personal like spirit animal, or Fylgja in the Norse tradition of I wanted something to connect me to the spirit guide that I found, which was turkey. And so feathers were the most obvious. I put them on my headdress because it felt right. And then I talked to the Siberian shamans. They're like, yeah, we put feathers on there so we can fly. I'm like, fuck, that's awesome.
That's dope. So I guess in paganism, then they also think that there's like a animal that there's like they have their own spirit animal kind of deal.
Yeah, so this kind of goes into almost the archetype discussion, like what is deity again? Because I do agree there is deity. There is the archetype that culture has created of the basics of humanity: the hero, the deceiver, the king, the queen, the mother, the maiden. All these things are things that we see throughout cultures because it's just parts of humanity. But I also believe in the spirit world, which is something that shamans are able to actually access. And I will specify once again, as I do in my shamanism video, I am not a shaman. I simply practice shamanic techniques to increase my ritual practice. I do not declare myself a shaman. It's a very sacred art form. And when I did my interview with them, I interviewed actual shamans who practice, who are part of the tradition. So I do all I can to respect it because I very much respect people who are able to be shamans, but I've learned a lot from them. So with that being said, looking into the concept of the spirit world and being able to use a drum and a trance to access the spirit world is a really beautiful thing. And I think that's what a lot of psychedelics do for us as well, is they open up our pathways to be able to interact with the spirit world. And then we start getting visions and imagery of what the spirit world is. And, people that do ayahuasca see the lizard people, and like, oh, there's some more people that saw the lizard people. And we are getting a more of an image of what the spirit world actually is. And we're seeing so many commonalities of what people experience here. And a lot of the times we see a tree. A lot of global shamanic practices see a tree as the central pillar of the universe or the spirit world. And no different in the Norse context of the Yggdrasil, where all the worlds sit. Even we sit upon Yggdrasil's branches. And so with going into the spirit world, you see these things, you experience them. It allows you to travel among the different realms. And one of the things when it comes to this is animals and guides. I actually am working on a video right now. So the Norse concept is called a Fylgja, and they have their own understanding of why they attach to yourself. And Fylgja sometimes translates to afterbirth. And so a Fylgja can actually be tied to you at birth. You're given to it at birth. And that's not common among all spiritual animal traditions. So you see differences among cultures. But the actual concept of a spirit animal is very universal, of having some kind of spiritual helper that assists you on your journeys through the spirit world, but also in real life.
Mm. That's really cool. It's interesting you were talking about a tree because that's like the next tattoo that I'm getting is going to be like a quarter sleeve on my left arm and
Oh,
like
nice.
a tree that starts at the bottom and works its way up. Just another little like I think poke at me the way that my world like reflects back to me. It's just like, hey, you said you're gonna get this tattoo, like fucking
You're
get
right.
it. Um, so this is what's interesting though, right? Is if it comes back to this idea of, and I don't expect you to have an answer to this, more of like a maybe a high thought, is like this idea of, there's spirit animals, right? And this idea in like paganism, which you said Philgia, that it's like, okay, people are assigned like a soul or spirit animal at birth. It's interesting because I have this interesting inclination, and maybe part of me knows the answer, but I'm going to explore the question anyhow. Is like, if your culture isn't set up to appreciate the idea of a spirit animal, or even wants to denounce the idea of a spirit animal, does that mean that this like Philgia doesn't, like, do you not have a spirit animal? Is it only going to incur in cultures that observe it, or does everybody have one, and only people who arrive at this place of, I don't want to say that, that sounds wrong. I was going to say enlightenment, but that doesn't feel right. This place,
Understanding.
yeah, like deeper understanding or deeper like knowledge of themselves come into contact
Yeah,
with us, or like how does
I
that
think
work?
I think I have an answer to it
Okay.
because and it's again not going to be universal. I don't think a lot of what I say can be applied to any universality
That
because
goes for
there's
me
very
too,
little
man.
100% truth to
Yeah.
anything. But I truly believe that we are all looking at the same thing just through different lenses. And so while some cultures may reject certain concepts and ideas, it doesn't change the idea that it doesn't exist. So I very much through my own personal experiences believe that spirit animals exist. I believe that many, many cultures also believe they exist and have different interpretations of them. And I may attach myself more to the Nordic concept because I simply follow Nordic deities. That doesn't change the idea that the actual spirit animal exists. It's still there. We just call it different things. We see it as different things. And certain cultures may be like, oh, we don't work with that. It doesn't change the fact that it doesn't exist.
Gotcha.
Because shamanism in general is an interesting topic when it comes to the Nordic and even Germanic, because we have very, very little information on the spiritual leaders of the pagan past. Like almost nothing do we know about what the actual spiritual leaders did. And so it's very like secondhand source. Someone comes up and says, oh, my family's been doing this for hundreds and hundreds of years, we've never written it down, and this is how we do it. That's basically all you can possibly get. So we look to the close cousins, the Sami people of the north have very similar concepts to the Nordic people in some areas, and the Nordic people do have interactions with them. Then you look to the Siberian, another northern tribe that have very similar ideas. And so you have to kind of draw conclusions and influences from all these things, even into like the Celtic Druids and that way the Druids understood things. So, there's nothing. It's like looking at a patchwork quilt that only has 10% of the patch is still there.
Dude, another great reflection. Because I always tell people, people always ask me like what I'm doing with this channel, and I'm like, I see it as like this mosaic where I'm trying to like figure out where the pieces of everything kind of fit into place. So it's like, like I use the word mosaic, but like a patchwork quilt could be the perfect analogy as well, where it's like, okay, people believe in spirituality, they believe in science, they believe in religion, they believe in paganism. It's like, where does this all fit kind of in this mosaic quilt or mosaic artwork, I suppose. But
Yeah.
let's move back to the spirit animals. How did you come across that your spirit animal was a turkey? And if people haven't come across their spirit animal yet, how would you kind of guide them or give suggestions maybe for figuring it out?
I'm not the best source for this because this is something that, I don't heavily work with. I actually, again, I'm working on a video right now. And for that video, I got someone who does. So a really close friend and a member of my community, Darius, works with Philgia and spirit animals way more. I sadly wasn't able to get this interview, but one of our community leaders is also part of the Blackfoot Native American tribe. And he works with, their version of it, but he's currently deployed in the military. So I was able to talk to him. But there are a lot of people and a lot of different ideas. But as far as my personal experiences, is what I can share is going into a trance. Some people, of course, like to use drugs to do this. I prefer it makes it a lot easier. But I prefer to use drums and singing and chanting to get into a trance. And it's not something that I can always do because our lives are so busy, your head is so full. But in the rare occasions I'm able to do a personal ritual where I use a drum, I have incense going, I use bells, I do chanting, I'll sit there and, for hours just get myself into this really, really deep headspace. And once you're able to get into that very, very dark place, you're able to explore more. And an actual trance is when you start walking that spirit world and start walking the world tree, so to speak. And it's just weird. You just get these visuals of what everything looks like in very continual things. And the longer you can get into a trance, the longer these visuals come to you without you placing them into your mind. And I remember the first time I actually tried to find my Philogia, find your spirit animal. You're told to just call out to it, call out in your thoughts, into your energy. I'm trying to find what my spirit animal is. And through that, I was sitting, in my vision, in my trance. I was on a lakeshore, which I got to, that's a whole thing. But anyways, I was on a lakeshore. And I looked to my left as I was calling to the spirit animal. And the first thing that popped in my mind was a turkey. And I was looking there, and I called to that turkey with my mind, with my spirit. And I said, are you my guide? And then it just started walking. And so in that vision, I followed it, and it led me to the world tree in that vision. And so it's like, this is my spirit animal. And knowing that I had no connection to the turkey before then, in the sense that, like, of course, everyone's like, I want a wolf, I want a bear, I want something cool. And that mine was a turkey. I'm like, has to be, because there's no way that I would have just put a turkey here, but then I started doing research into concepts. This mostly does come from Native American, because turkeys are not native to the Scandinavian region, of researching what a turkey symbolizes, and its community and abundance and hospitality. And considering that I'm really big into the community aspect of this, I'm like, it really does make sense that my spirit animal, my guide, is a turkey.
That's so cool. Yeah, that's so cool, because it's funny. I have a similar story, but it's not with like spirit animals. It actually has to do with the name of my spirit. And where was I gonna, like, the idea of the deep trance too? There's so many similarities here. So like the deep trance is interesting, because I've heard about like drumming and getting into this like place of like it's almost like getting your brain waves into the right frequency so that you're able to access almost this other world. And I've obtained that.
You're a radio transmitter.
Yeah.
You're tuning yourself properly.
Yeah, exactly. And I kind of did this with meditating, where I got into this deep meditative state and accessed like what I call the Akashic records. So you get like this records of everything in your life, the past, the future. And for me, an element of this was I had a book that it was like the book of my life, essentially, a book of my soul. And whenever I opened it up, it was like, the audio tape that I was listening to was like, you're going to see a name on the front cover, and this name is the name of your soul. And it said Igor. And I had this like impulse to like push it away initially. I was like, I don't like that name. Like, that's definitely not it. And through the rest of that meditation, I actually discovered my Celtic past life. But then it wasn't till like almost a year later where I came back to like, oh, like, I wonder what my spirit name is. And I kind of like went through a different meditation, and Igor was what popped up. And I was like, no fucking way. I was like, I don't really. Yeah. That was it. Yeah. I was like, fuck. And I started kind of like laughing and like, all right, maybe it is it. And then in the meditation, they were like, if you're laughing and kind of like joking around, then like, this is it. Like, this is your name. I'm like, fuck. Like,
yeah.
And it was funny, because in your story, you're like, everyone wants to be like this wolf, or this like badass fucking animal wants to be their guide. But when it comes back to it, that's almost the ego, right? Like the ego was what was pushing away my name. The ego is what went into attract or attach to
the ego wolf. Was pushing away Igor.
Oh shit. Oh shit, dude, you got me there.
Put that on a fucking t-shirt.
Yeah, Igor. Oh, dude, that'd be good marketing. Maybe I need to do that. Yeah, dude. And so it was interesting that like nobody wants to quote unquote be a fucking turkey, like, right? Like no one's gonna be like proud and like putting a shirt. Maybe you could put a shirt that says like, embrace the turkey.
It's funny. I think people like joke about it more. Like, again, we have like our community Discord, and I get notifications all the time. People are like, "Oh, I saw Jacob today, and it was just a turkey in the field or something like that." Dude. But it happens to me all the time.
Merchandise.
Yeah, and then all the time people bring me gifts. Like I have so many turkey foots and turkey feathers that people are like, I thought about it. And they're like, oh, great. So I got turkey everywhere in my house.
That's awesome.
But I also like, ever since I found that, I don't eat turkey anymore. I just have this aversion. Like, I don't know if I actually want to eat this anymore. And I haven't eaten turkey since I found that out.
Whoa, that's trippy.
Yeah.
Do you just like what does it feel like? You're just like, I don't want to eat this. Like, it doesn't taste good.
I think it's a respect thing.
Okay.
Where it's just like, obviously if you're like spirit animals like a cow or something, that might be a little bit more difficult.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I can't eat steak anymore. Ooh. But I don't think that's, you can't necessarily think about it like that. I don't think that's a universal thing. It's just a personal thing. But it was just my way of showing respect to my turkey, my spirit guide. I won't eat turkey anymore.
Yeah, because some people could see that as like getting closer to them by like eating it, like appreciating it. It could be like, oh, like maybe I'm.
But then you start going into but then I start eating people. Am I getting closer to them?
Well, dude.
Yeah, there's some weird, you go into like some, I don't know a lot about it, but I know there is a Hindu cult of Shiva, I believe, that does eat people.
Really?
Yeah, and they sit on the Ganges, because people a lot of times will die into the Ganges because they see it as a spiritual thing. And then there's this cult that sits on the edge of the river, downriver, and eats the bodies.
Whoa.
Yeah. World's a weird place.
Yeah. This entire podcast has been figuring out just how weird it is.
Yeah.
But is there any like history with paganism and cannibalism? Is there any overlap there or no?
Not that I know of. I know, well, obviously you go into like further out, you'll find it, and I'm sure it exists.
It's like fringe
culture and
it's like fringe stuff.
Yeah, it's the fringe stuff. I think the thing that comes up a lot of people want to talk about is like human sacrifice. I think that's like the thing that people always want to mention, because that's one of the first concepts people understand of like, oh, they used to sacrifice people. I'm like, yeah, so did Jews, and the ancient times. Some of the stories of the Bible is literally telling people to sacrifice their sons and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So that's something that we as humans, and that's my argument, is always like in the ancient past, it's something that humans understood as a way to connect to spirit and the gods, was to sacrifice a human life. However, we as a society have collectively understood that is no longer necessary. So it's just one part of our, I believe, our human understanding of spirit is that we don't need to do that anymore. I don't think we're losing anything by not doing it. I think I've waited a long time to bring this up, but have you ever heard of the band called Hylon?
Hylon, no.
They will change your life.
Hylon.
So they are. So it's HEILUNG. It's the German word for healing.
HEILUNG.
Yeah.
Okay.
One of the craziest experiences of your life. It's a band, but all of their songs are rituals where they're trying to understand ancient lyrics, ancient poems.
Okay.
And so they sing them and they create like pageantry around them to try to create effect, much like I do with my rituals. They'll sing the names of Odin. Like one of their songs is literally just the names of Odin, and them doing something along with it. And it is amazing. And then they've actually started expanding outside of the Germanic and Norwegian area. They just did a song on their newest album, which is singing the oldest song known to humanity, which comes from Mesopotamia.
Whoa.
And it's about the god. It's about the I believe, if I remember this correctly, she is the Mesopotamian moon goddess, Nikal. And so they're like singing it, and you're listening to it. It's like, this song is like thousands of years old, and you're listening to it, and it gives you chills, man. It's great. And so, really great band. I can't even remember when I was talking about that. I just needed to do a Hylung plug because they're incredible.
We were talking about, were we talking about pop culture references? Oh, human sacrifice.
Human sacrifice. Okay, so they have a song called Troust. And like the actual lyrics aren't as important as their performance of it. Okay. And what they do on stage is they bring a woman, and she's always bare chested. Like they're really big on making sure she's bare chested. And they only on venues that are.
What do you mean by bare chested? As in like just her boobs are out?
Like she's naked.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, she's.
I didn't know if that meant like she didn't have boobs or like. Oh, okay.
No. So yeah, they're really big on it. The only venues that are like, no, you cannot. She wears a shirt, but otherwise they're completely topless, and they make sure that people are aware, like they are topless, but you don't even think about it. And so she's out there, and they tie her up with a spear, and they like shove the spear through her, and through the course of the song, she dies. She like goes to the floor, and then the second half of the song is her rising again and joining almost like the ancestors in a way. So it's almost like watching like a humane human sacrifice in the performance of the song. And sitting there watching it, you're like, holy shit, I think I get it. I get why they did it, but I also get that we don't do it anymore.
Interesting. Dude, that's so fascinating. So, I'll have to check that out.
And we tried that as well. So after going to that show, I went there with all the leadership, like the majority of the leadership of our community, because I think it's very, very powerful performance, and it inspired everyone to like create wild rituals. Like our rituals these last like 6 months have been insane. And like one of the rituals we did was like a Valkyrie ritual where we honored like the Valkyries that pick up the dead and take them to Valhalla. And like during the course of the ritual, we do like a fake like death, like someone screams and then she dies and then like rises again through song. So in a way, it's like understanding why we used to do it, but also accepting why we no longer do it.
Yeah, dude, there's a lot of crazy shit out there. Like, I mean, in regards to like, the human sacrifice stuff, and I'm thinking of pop culture references, and there's a one movie. Have you ever heard of or watched the movie Midsommar?
Oh God.
Is that
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah.
I'm guessing there's a lot
Yeah.
of
That's a sore spot for a lot of people.
Is it because of their inaccurate portrayal? Okay, first of all, let me at least read the Wikipedia definition just so people are on the same page if they've never seen the movie.
Read that. Let me grab some water. So I'm gonna just read that to the
Okay,
people.
I'll do that so everyone's on the same page. Guys, so if you haven't seen Midsommar, first of all, I'm not going to say it's for everybody. It's a pretty like intense movie. So Midsommar, I'm going to read the Wikipedia definition here. Midsommar is a 2019 psychological horror film written and directed by Ari Aster. The film stars certain people as a dysfunctional. Stars Florence and Jack, who are a dysfunctional couple who travel to Sweden with a group of friends for a midsummer festival, only to find themselves in the clutches of a sinister cult practicing Scandinavian paganism. That's interesting because I didn't actually know that it was paganism. So I gave them the brief introduction of it being a midsummer festival for Scandinavian paganism. And I don't even know if they say in the film that it is paganism. They might, but I'm not sure that they do. So this is, first of all, a spoiler alert for anyone at this point. What happens?
Spoiler, don't watch it.
Spoiler, don't watch it. It's fucking like, it'll fuck you up. Like, there's some parts in it that you're like, whoa, like, what the fuck did I just watch? Because it twists very quickly. Like, it goes from 0 to 100 very quickly. And as a pat on the back, I saw that shit coming. Like, whenever they started drinking the water, I was like,
oh, dude, it was over.
I was like, I could tell what's about to happen here. I was like, I'm feeling the energy of this movie, and it's about to get dark real quick. With that being said, the movie starts off like real dark with like the chick's parents killing themselves, or the daughter kills her parents, and the chicks,
with like the ventilator or gas,
the CO2 from the car.
It's like,
bro, ugh. It started off dark and it got only darker.
The thing I will give that movie credit, it is the most disturbing movie ever to happen during daylight.
That's
because like the whole movie is basically daylight.
Yeah.
That's the whole thing. It's like Swedish midsummer lasts until like basically the entire day. Of the midnight sun.
Because it's like 24 hours of sunlight where they were at in the world. Dude, so help me unpack it. Like, first of all, is there like actual legitimacy to this paganism? Like, you kind of had this reaction. So what is maybe first of all, what's like the generic reaction, and then what, like, help me get your line of thought. What are you thinking here?
Okay. So first off, the Swedes fucking despise that movie.
Okay.
Because Midsummer is still a tradition they very, very much do today. Like, Midsummer never went away. It never was remotely affected by Christianity. So Midsummer to this day is the biggest holiday in Sweden. And it's very, very like tame. It's basically, there's a maypole, there's songs. Like, I was doing research for my next book because it takes place during Midsummer. And I was interviewing someone from Sweden to get like how they do it. And there's literally a song about how they like ribbit and how frogs have weird eyes and no tails, and they ribbit and they hop. And so it's very much just like family barbecue, dance around a maypole, like great time. Like, yes, there are legends around it. There's folklore. Like, there's a legend of like, a creature that lives in a river that it, like sings songs to children to eat them and stuff like that. Nothing that's out of the ordinary as far as like strange.
There's that fear again, by the way. There's a fear, by the way. Not in the river.
Yeah, don't drown, kids.
Yeah,
they'll kill you.
Yeah, okay. There you go.
So yeah, there's a concept of that for sure. But the actual Midsummer is so very much alive that this movie was seen as an insult by a lot of people to the fact that the tradition never went away, because it's definitely showing people that have no knowledge of Midsummer, like, oh, look how creepy Midsummer is. Oh, they're going to drug you and kill you. When it's like, it's still happening. Like, it's still going on. And I think that's what really threw people off as far as like the actual like Midsummer that still survives. Because, one of the things I have to worry about writing this book is a lot of people know that movie before they actually know what Midsummer actually is,
myself included.
Yeah, and it's like Midsummer is such a tame, wholesome holiday that this movie like really fucked with it. Now, having said that, the movie, from a person that really enjoys movie, is a good movie, in the sense that they wanted to do something and they did it, and they did it exactly how I think they wanted to do it, and they created the effect they wanted to create. the whole movie is like a bad mushroom trip, and they're doing mushrooms like the whole time. And I think they actually really well like did a bad mushroom trip well, like in the
It's a
sense of like
really
the
good,
hysteria.
yeah, it's a
Yeah.
really good, yeah, showing of like how you actually like feel and look whenever they first show up at the area, like at the because when they first get there, right, they all take mushrooms and they're sitting on that
Yeah.
hillside. I thought that was like a very well like portrayed, like the way,
Yeah.
like what you see, what you feel, the way you think
Yeah.
everyone else
The
is.
warping.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That was super well done. Um,
Yeah, and even like, like the final dinner scene, like the flowers popping and stuff like that. Like I've
oh
had that
yeah,
before where I was in the like I was in a dead field in winter tripping, and like I saw the plants growing. And it's like that was one of the things I was actually seeing on the trip. And so I was like, they did it. They
yeah,
did a great job. Doesn't mean I like it.
yeah. Maybe not so much for the cultural references, but
Right. Because they took a lot of concepts and then they just twisted them. I mean, the way to look at that movie is more or less like the slasher films of the United States, like Halloween or Scream or stuff like that. They took concepts that we know very little of, like they knew very little about, and twisted them, warped them to what they needed them to be.
right. So here I'll elaborate on those twisted and warped sense of them. So if you're trying to watch this movie, then press skip a little bit here. But essentially, like the really like out there things that were pretty like wild and riveting was the very first thing was that they had the oldest couple of the tribe who I think hit the age of 75, which they alluded to at the beginning, and I saw this coming. But the couple hit the age of 75, and basically they jumped off a cliff to kill themselves. And they jump off the cliff, they kill themselves. Then there was what else happened? Some kid was trying to like read a book of like their scripture, and it was basically like a mentally challenged kid would like paint in the book, and then it was like interpreted by the shamans, but they didn't let outsiders see it, so then they killed the guy that saw it. And
Right.
then they had another dude, and these are probably like the most like impacting in the mind. They had another dude who they brought there as being like the what was he? He was like supposed to be basically like their child bearer, because they needed like a new seed, like a new like
Yeah.
genetics to come in so that they basically weren't an incestuous society. So then he impregnates like a chick who basically like just became fertile essentially. So she was probably like,
Yeah. And they had their weird like orgy
dude,
and
that was fucking
orgasm.
yeah,
Yeah.
like it was weird. I
The whole movie, you're just
yeah,
sitting there like,
you feel violated. Yeah.
yeah.
I've never seen that many naked women on screen and felt violated myself. Like,
Oh yeah, you're like so unturned on.
bro,
Like you're just like,
bro, and then there
oh,
the mentally challenged kid sitting in the corner, like watching too. Like,
oh yeah.
bro, that was a weird fucking scene. Like,
Again, like what it wanted, that movie wanted to make you uncomfortable as humanly possible, and it did great.
bro, and then they had the dude that they killed like strung up in like the greenhouse with like above the plants, and they had
Yeah.
like his
So okay,
was
so
he
this
still
is a good
breathing? And he
transition.
was still breathing too?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
So that is. Have you ever heard like the blood eagle
No.
concept? So this was really big and made popular because of the Vikings TV show. So a blood eagle is something we know very, 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 very little about, and probably happened very, very, very little. But it was a way of killing somebody where you would crack open their ribs from behind and then pull out their lungs and lay it onto their shoulders. And they would still be breathing if they hadn't died at that point. And so the lungs would look like wings as they opened and closed, and then you would have your skin like flayed out.
Jeez.
And so that was their interpretation of that. My actual knowledge of like, far as I know, in history we have very small accounts of they drew a blood eagle on their back, and then that's it. And I think that's only like 3 or 4 occurrences we hear the blood eagle was drawn. And then there's like one artifact where there's someone laying on a stone, and then there's an eagle above them, and that's what we interpret as the blood eagle. And so it's a very, very smally reference, probably very, very rare event that happened that has been oversaturated with our modern concept of death. And so they took that, they're like, oh, sweet, let's fuck with people. And then they put that in the movie. They took the worst things that we know about history and put it into
And
the
amplify
concept.
them. And well, and maybe that plays to their credit, right? Because if there's this level, right, and this is the way I view the world, and might not agree with everyone or yourself included, but the way I view it is that, there's these different energies, and if we're a soul that reincarnates and we've had these past life experiences and we're able to conceptualize these things and we have that energy within us, and somebody puts on display this blood eagle, for instance, maybe there's a part of my psyche, my subconscious belief system from a past life that has seen this before. Or even if the blood eagle is just as you described it, just this painting on the back, it hits me at this very deep place of like, holy shit, like there's a lot of profoundness, and it even strikes as being more true. Whether or not it's actually true is one thing, but
Yeah.
it feels more true because of this deep knowing from a past life, or something.
Yeah, I think the main thing that threw people off, and I think my main complaint, is that it suggested that these things could still possibly happen today, and that's so far from reality of what Scandinavia is. Like, they're like the nicest people on the planet. They may have a slight superiority complex, but they're like the nicest people on the planet. And so, like, to suggest that this could possibly happen, I think is what threw people off the most. Like,
Mm.
this cult of people that like attract foreigners into it to basically kill them or use them for reproduction and then basically torture them. And I'm not even actually sure the origins personally of the like Diet 72 or 75. It's something that's also referenced in the Norse Men TV show on Netflix. That's like the comedy show. That's actually their opening episode is joking about that. Of like a bunch of old guys are like, well, I don't want to do it. You do it first. And they're like, oh, no, you do it first. And then someone finally does it. And they're like, no, we're not doing that. Let's go back to the village. And so I'm not actually sure of the origin of that, if it actually has a historical origin or not. So I'm not sure. But again, they took something they saw and they're like, oh yeah, we can make this dark and twisted.
Mm. That's an interesting point too, right? Is like this imbuing with the truth with like falsehood, which is super fascinating to me, because I've seen that a lot with like Ancient Aliens is like the first thing that always comes to mind for me, where they show all of these like historical accounts. And I don't know if we've talked about this, but I'm a channel, so I can like kind of like channel different energies and whatnot. And what's interesting too is I've always seen kind of in like TV shows, or like what is put out there for people to see, or anytime people talk about like inner earth, or what's it called, it's called hollow earth theory, is like whenever there's mainstream attention on things like very real deep things, it seems to be that they mix the truth with like a little bit of falsehood, so that they can also
Yeah.
almost be like, oh well, like, yeah, no, it was kind of all just a joke, like haha. But then there are some pieces of it that are true, like maybe this blood eagle thing, for instance,
Right.
that is true. So then you like are almost lost with like knowing what to believe or what not to believe whenever this information is presented.
Yeah, and I think that's just media needing to sell. The actual reality of history is less dramatic than the what actually happened. So they need to be like, oh well, the story of Ragnar Lothbrok. We can make a whole TV show on it. So we need to draw all these elements of drama that we can
Mm.
possibly fit into a show. And so it creates this misunderstanding. But as long as you go into these shows like Midsommar or Vikings with that understanding that this is not history, this is entertainment, with like a veneer of history, a veneer of culture and dark culture, then yes, it can be enjoyed. And I think that's the appropriate way. But it's when that these things are created and then people accept it as truth that it becomes a problem.
Well, that's okay. So this brings up an interesting dialogue, especially being content creators that we are, is trying to find that balance, right? Between like, I guess it's not really a balance, right? Like how do you make things that are interesting, like things that are truthful, interesting and fun and joyous, without injecting in this like almost superfluous, I don't know if that's how you use the word superfluous, but this like over the top information that actually doesn't have basis in reality, and actually mix
Right.
that with like how do you actually stick to the truth of like what it is and make it interesting, as opposed to like hitting this range of going over the top and injecting in falsehoods within the actual truth, like we saw in
Yeah,
Midsommar.
I think it's all about balance. So the biggest Norse mythology YouTuber out there is a guy named Jackson Crawford. He does translations of the Poetic Edda. He is a straight scholarly cowboy. Like, he is from Colorado. I don't know where he's originally from, but he was teaching in Colorado. Wears a cowboy hat. Doesn't try to be anything more than he is. He is a professor that teaches you Norse mythology. He gives it to you straight. He gives it to you dry, and you ain't gonna like it, but he's gonna give it to you. And so I think that's how he built his channel, and it's very, very popular because of that. But God, I'm so bored watching it. It really is just a lecture of here is the Old Norse pronunciations of this word. Here's the reconstructed Old Norse pronunciation of this word. And he very rarely injects anything into it. But that's the beauty of his channel, is you're not going to get anything that shouldn't be there. I think the funniest thing that ever happened is he had something in the background that he took and he was like, scratch his back with it. And then he like put it back. And that is the level of his humor. And that is it.
Okay.
Whereas me, I've had to, find that balance with the religion and stuff, because obviously I was like, I want to show it. So balancing the flair for the dramatic versus the actual religion. And I will definitely say I have a flair for the dramatic. It's part of being a YouTuber, and it's going to happen. But I think in the recent years and the recent gatherings, we've leveled out. We've, found that balance of, why do we do these things? And, we were talking about a ritual, and we're like, oh, it'd be really cool to do a ritual where we had a shield wall, because it's a very popular aesthetic, is having the shields go up together, the Viking shield wall kind of thing. And I'm like, okay, that's a cool aesthetic, but now let's make sure it actually has something to do with religion and has a thing that actually creates the power behind it. And so, yes, we may have a flair for the dramatic. We may have some, theatrics, but it ultimately has to come to a religious point. And so that's all. We always have to check ourselves on that.
That's an interesting point, right? Is like, and this is what was kind of running through my head right here. Maybe I do this with Ancient Aliens, and maybe you can do this with like Midsommar, is actually create content around that and be like, okay, this is this like really interesting, like really captivating. A lot of people saw this. Now let's break it down. Where's the truth in the history? And like, where's like, just, are they injecting fun and energy and like making it try to be digestible, or emphasize on that edge of edgy and psycho, kind of psychological thriller horror type of thing?
Yeah, and I think that's, again, like, looking at Midsommar is, if you want an entertaining movie, well, I don't even know if I would call it entertaining. If you want a movie that makes you feel weird and does it through art, it's like sound art. Okay,
Hold on, real quick. I just lost your audio, so I'm not sure what happened there. Can you try talking again?
Testing.
Yeah, I don't have you.
Hello.
Let me. We'll pause the recording and then bring you right back. Yeah, your table's affecting my recording over here. So, shit.
All right.
Try again.
My hands here. So as far as like Midsommar, and I think the way to look at this is, if you're going into Midsommar wanting an experience, like a very specific experience, as far as like feeling creepy, feel like daytime horror, then great. But don't go into Midsommar expecting a representation of Swedish culture. And I think that's just where those things get wrapped in together. And people are like, oh, this is Swedish culture and a horror movie at the same time. It's like, no, it is not. It is a horror experience based on Swedish folklore, which I'm sure that's when they sat down and made it. That was their idea. It's just when it translates to the modern audience and the millions of people that watch these things, we were talking about the sizes of audiences and stuff like that. People don't understand that concept when they watch these things.
I wonder how many people watch that movie. Let me look that up. Let me see if they have numbers on that.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, I'm sure it did fine. I mean, usually those horror movies have very small budgets, and they usually pull in, 80, 90 million or something.
Bro, I know. What was the one movie? Blair Witch Project. It was like,
oh yeah,
it was like $10,000 to make it, and they made like $200 million.
Well, yeah, it was Paranormal Activity as well. I think that was like a $60,000 budget and brought in like 400 million or something.
Dude, so crazy, right? Okay, let me see here. Midsommar grossed a total of $48 million. It was projected. It was projected for 8 to 10 million. Made 3 million on its first day.
What was the budget on it?
Yeah, I'm trying to see here. Maybe just search budget.
Yeah, and so
9 million. Seems like a lot.
Yeah, it was pretty high budget for a movie like that. But yeah, I don't know. I guess like the balance is key. We're always going to have to check ourselves. We're always going to have to stop ourselves and think, why are we doing this? And with anything in life, I think if you're doing psychedelics, if you're doing mushrooms to get high and that's it, start checking yourself in that. I only do psychedelics or mushrooms in order to enhance a spiritual experience. I don't do it to be the spiritual experience.
Yeah, man. I mean, intention. We could do a whole podcast on intention. Like, it's so powerful. Sure. I mean, especially when it comes to like psychedelics or whatnot. Like, if you're setting the intention to have fun, totally cool. Do what you got to do. Yeah. Be safe. Stay hydrated. Do it responsibly. Avoid alcohol. Keep snacks around. Yeah, have a good time. All for it. But it's so important. I mean, that even goes to this education, or like education versus entertainment, right? Am I watching this to be educated, or am I watching this to be entertained? And I think where it becomes difficult, and I've noticed this with like I've noticed this with social media as well, is like, all right, am I using this to get entertainment or am I using this to get education? And there's such a blend, there's such an overlap that I think it
Yeah.
becomes difficult for our brains to be able to discern. Like, we almost have to actively be discerning, like, okay, is this for education, or is this information education, or is it entertainment?
Yeah, we have to set our time. Like, it's right, this hour is entertainment time. This hour is work time. And, that's something I've really had to work on. It's something I'm still working on in our modern digital world as a content creator that runs social media. You know, I woke up this morning. I feel like I turned Canadian. I woke up, and I
Use the
got to
Latin
work.
thing.
Yeah, right, right. I drank some water, I had a little bit of breakfast, but I sat there and I did my social media work for the day. I made my post on the 2 accounts that I'm, a part of. I responded to messages, I checked the comments, and then that was it. That's all I'm going to do today for that. But because the moment I let that seep longer than it needs to be, then it becomes drain time. It becomes endless scrolls. It becomes, I'm just doing this for no reason. And then I'll have entertainment time. I knew how to do this podcast. I know after this, I need to go to the store. And then I have entertainment time. Whatever I want to do in that 2-hour window to entertain myself, whether it watch movies, scroll social media endlessly, play video games, that's fine. But I have to establish those things for myself.
No, I absolutely love that. And I think what I was trying to like point towards, and there's a question here, I think, for you as well, being a content creator, is like, if you go on to, let's say, TikTok's the perfect example. You're scrolling and it's like the piece of thing that you're consuming can very much be an entertainment thing versus an education thing, right?
Right.
If you're following a bunch of people who are entertainers and educators, to discern from the every 30 seconds, like, okay, is this an entertainment? Is this a piece of entertainment or a piece of education?
Yeah.
And to be able to make that discernment, I think, is really difficult, because it takes a proactive approach to each piece of information. And if you're flicking your finger every 5 or 30 seconds, you have to take that second. You have to take that second to be like, okay, am I educating myself or am I entertaining myself? And whenever you have this cluster of information, it becomes hard to discern which is which piece of information.
Well, yeah. Let's look at the exact terminology here. The news feed, the feed. You're feeding something. And so you have to choose what you're feeding yourself. And what you were doing is, when we're scrolling on social media nowadays, we're trusting an algorithm to feed us. You're not feeding yourself anymore. And so what the algorithm is going to send you is what it believes you are going to need to keep feeding and keep consuming. And so something I actually noticed recently, and people won't believe me when I say this, but truly, I keep my Wisdom of Odin Instagram. It's mostly like like pagan stuff. It's almost all pagan content. But recently, there's been an infusion of boobs, and out of nowhere, I'll scroll and it'll be like, oh, here's this girl talking, but she's got like her nipples pointed out, and it's useless content. And I'm like, why is this happening? Why all of a sudden am I
Did you
getting
start
that
liking
infusion?
stuff? Did you start liking it?
No, I don't ever like anything.
That was my
But I
problem.
think what it, yeah, you're like, oops, keep
Dude,
going.
I had to stop. I literally had to stop, and I just like will now pass them by, and like I try to now
Well,
like other shit so that it feeds me other shit
right,
as opposed to just
but
mindless tits.
they alter the algorithm all the time, and that's the thing. I noticed a change overnight where my
Mm.
normal feed was now being infused with it, and I'm sure they made a tweak where it was like, oh, male, straight, white, okay, feed him this. Here's boobs. Here's this. Here's what women we think he likes. And the fact that the algorithm is thinking of these things now is obscene, and that's terrifying. And so being able to control, I don't use the feed. I search things like, okay, am I
Mm.
wanting to entertain myself? And so I'll search like, MRE videos. I weirdly find MREs interesting. And so I'll search MRE, find what content there. I'll search Norse Pagan if I want to find stuff there.
What's MRE?
Like, I forget the actual terminology. It's what they use to feed soldiers when they deploy. So like meals ready to eat. That's it.
Okay, my computer's
And
starting to
so it's
lag
just
a little,
literally
but yeah.
it's just the food science of how you feed soldiers.
Oh.
And so it's just like how they
Hmm.
dehydrate food and how they, make sure that can survive 5 years. The food, like I have an MRE around here somewhere. A lot of my friends in the military, so they'll give them to me as gifts because they know I find them interesting. But that's
Okay.
one of the weird,
Different
quirky
rabbit
things.
hole. Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the weird, quirky things I find interesting. Everyone has those things. And so if I want content like that, if I find that entertaining, I will search it. I won't trust the feed to give it to me.
Gotcha.
Is the point here.
Yeah, man. I mean, especially on Instagram, man, it seems like there's this overwhelming And I honestly always thought it was because I just like liked hot pictures. I was like, oh,
Yeah.
okay, like this chick's hot, like I'll like it. But it's really interesting now because like this is where it comes back to education versus entertainment. If you see a
Yeah.
hot girl, right, it releases dopamine, it releases serotonin in your brain
Yeah.
of like, ooh, I want, give me, yes. And then they say some fucking stupid ass shit like all men are pigs, or I'm being a little bit playful here, I guess, but in like
You're
over
right.
the top. But they'll say something ridiculous about like red flags, or they'll say some stupid shit. And since all of these chemicals are getting released in your brain, there's like a belief that you attach to it. Like it gets into your subconscious
Right.
mind, whatever it is they're saying, and there's no validity. The only validity that they have is that they're a hot chick and their boobs are out. And it's like, some
Yeah.
reason your brain's just like, okay, believe it, and then store it in there. And it's like,
I'm thinking of like a catchy hashtag here, like protect your dopamine.
defend.
Because
There it is. Defend your
yeah,
dopamine.
defend your
Dopamine
dopamine.
defenders.
Oh, dude. Yeah, we've the way we can have a new make a new podcast called Dopamine Defenders.
Oh, all right. We'll talk about that. I like it
because I alongside of my pagan understanding, also I started discovering like the minimalism stuff, and not necessarily living with like a bowl and like a pillow. Like I don't believe in that. I just believe living with less is good, because I understand that there's very little things I need to actually make myself happy. All the other stuff is just material want and desire. And I think when we do meditations, when we do I like to call it medicine when we do like drugs, when we do, mushrooms, of clearing ourselves of something. That's, mushrooms clear my mind of all the bullshit. And so I can return to the bullshit and cycle through it. Recently coming back from a spiritual gathering, looking at my phone like you are a tool, you do not control me kind of thing. And returning to the tool aspect of it.
I like that.
And the same thing with you go with entertainment versus, work. What is work? What is entertainment? What is education? And then labeling those things so we understand them.
Well, bro, and this is probably also a piece of what I was saying, and this was like a part of my content journey. Is once you start creating content, you almost see behind the scenes of either the cuts, the edits,
Right.
the camera angles. And I was like cutting myself off from that relaxation and entertainment, because anytime I was like looking at content, I'm like sitting there like, why is this viral? Like, how do they start this? What was the first thing they said? Why am I entertained? Where's the dopamine spikes in my brain? Why am I getting these dopamine spikes? And so it became like I was still working while getting entertained, and it was draining the fucking shit out of me because I could not sit there and just like take it for what it was. It was very much like, I want to recreate this, but with like my own twist of like what I'm doing. And so it was
I would almost argue as a content creator, you almost have to say like, no, that's work. Like when it comes to Instagram,
oh, for sure.
I very rarely use Instagram for pleasure anymore. To me, it's mostly like, no, that's work. A lot of the times I'll actually delete it off my phone after I'm done for the day. And I'll re-download it the next morning, because why not? And it makes sure, because we're so used to like having idle time. You're sitting there, they're like, oh, cool. Swipe. You don't even know. And I start asking myself that question. I think this is one of those open consciousness thing, it kind of fits in with the channel, is ask yourself questions. When you reach for that phone, why am I doing this? Is it to entertain? Well, why was the scrolling doing for me? And I think when we start asking ourselves that questions, we start building those systems for living that make us happier.
Oh, 100%, man. 100%. And it's really just bringing that conscious awareness into it to be like, okay, why am I doing what I'm doing? Right. And I think there's a lot of times, and I've been trying to do this actually in the last month, like this past month, for those listening, this is going to be airing in January, but we're talking in December. Like this past like month, I was like, okay, I've been doing so much fucking shit for like the last 16 months. It's been crazy. I've uploaded 2 podcasts a week for the last 16 months. Like it's crazy. And I came to this realization of like, I'm never in that like relaxation or receiving mode, right? It feeds on this topic. Even if I'm jumping on Instagram, it's not for mindless entertainment. If I see a video, I instantly am like, okay, why is this working? Like, why is this happening? And so I've really needed to kind of step back, I think, these next couple weeks and like, okay, I'm putting myself in receiving mode. I'm relaxing. I'm like receiving. And it was weird. It was weird because there was like this like very like uncomfortable, like if I'm not doing something, it's not working, like nothing's happening.
Meanwhile, like shaking.
It's like I need to do something. And so I've been very much in that energy of just like, okay, just chill, do nothing. I've been trying to meditate more. When I get uncomfortable, it's like, why am I uncomfortable? It's like, oh, you feel like you should be doing something, but I'm not doing something, and it gets this like weird little mind fuck starts happening.
Yeah. No, I mean, honestly, I'm terrible at it. I'm a workaholic. I haven't had a day off in probably 6 months, but I schedule that time. Like I said, after this podcast, it's my free time. I don't allow it to be infected with work. I don't allow it to be infected with other things. I have true 3-4 hours of decompression. And getting to that point allowed me to still be a workaholic. So
I think
maybe not the best example.
Well, no, but I think that's the beautiful thing, and that's kind of what I'm getting to, or at least where I'm starting to arrive at, which is having that healthy balance of actually kind of setting it up where it's like, okay, you're grinding for, let's say, 8 hours. Let's say you do 8 hours of solid quote unquote work, but it's not work to you because you love what you're doing. You love the content you're putting out there. You love learning about it. You love diving into it. But you need this like decompression state. So you take then the next 2 hours, or you at least set aside those 2 hours of doing nothing, of relaxing, of mindless entertainment. Maybe you put on a movie, right? And it allows you to actually continue doing it. You're balancing the doing with receiving. You're balancing that grind with relaxation. Whereas my mind, like the last 16 months, there was no receiving, there was no relaxation. It was
Yeah, it's like a breath.
Yeah,
In
it's like,
and out.
how can I turn this into content? How can I turn that into content? Even when I was on vacation, it was like, how can I make content out of this?
Oh,
It's
fuck
like,
yeah. Tell me about it.
right? Yeah, but I think that's like really the place to be, is in that place of like finding that balance between the doing and then the relax and
So I think I
restoration.
can turn this back to paganism here. So
All right, let's do it. I love
let's
it.
go. Yeah, so let's return to paganism. So even into the holiday thing. So we typically have our events around the solstices and equinoxes. And what I've truly appreciated about having these times of year, looking at the ancestors, looking at the ancient times of why they celebrated, it was because of the agriculture. Like, oh, we celebrate spring because we're planting our crops. We celebrate midsummer because we're working hard. We celebrate the harvest because we finally did the work. We celebrate winter because it's dark, and this might be the last time we see our family because the winter and the wolves are going to kill them. These are the reasons they did these things. And so we don't have to do that now because we don't live by these cycles anymore. But what they do for us now is we sit down, we sit in spring, we reflect on spring, we reflect on the work that we have before us, we reflect on beauty, we slow down time for a weekend, for a day, and we say, thank the world, thank the gods, thank the flowers for being beautiful. It allows us to enjoy our lives even more. And I think that's the true beauty of practicing paganism, is you look at these archetypes and these concepts and you're thankful for them. You're thankful for the life you live. And even the hardship. Odin in particular is a deity of hardship. Because he had to sacrifice. Like, one of the main motifs of Odin is he hung from a tree pierced by a weapon for 9 days and 9 nights with no food and no water. And so this idea of sacrifice, but in the end, he got magic. In the end, he got the magic of the runes. And so within our own lives, we make sacrifices all the time. We have to give things up in order to get better, in order to grow. And so when life gets hard, when it gets painful, even, you're sitting here like, no, these are the sacrifices I have to make. I have to learn from these things. And you're able to connect with Odin on a deeper level because of that. So I think it allows us to live a life of understanding that life is sometimes hard, but slow down and realize why is it hard, and then enjoy when it gets better.
Dude, I love that. I love that. And I'm getting I'm getting the ping in the back of my head that we should like wrap this up, bring it to a close. I am seeing, what is it? Wow, I'm losing my train of thought. My brain's lagging. I'm seeing some glitches on the technology right now.
I actually feel tired. We're getting the
You're
signs,
feeling it
man.
as
We're
well.
getting the signs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I always love giving the space for the guests that I have on. Whatever, speak to the audience, whatever you want to encourage them to do. If you want them to research anything, I know you got a book that just came out. You can plug your book. So like, take this time now to speak to the audience, tell them what you want them to do, you want to plug, give words of encouragement. So the floor is yours.
Yeah. So I think the book is actually a good place to go, because the theme behind the book is something that I really, really believe in. So A Yule Story is the book I wrote. It's a children's story, so to speak. Anyone can enjoy it, though, because I really loved Christmas movies as a kid, like 1990s Christmas movies, Home Alone, A Christmas Vacation. And I really sat down and I was like, why did I love those movies so much? And I broke them down and I was like, it was the family elements. It was the importance of family, of exchanging gifts with your loved ones. But also there was that magical element. All these movies had an element of magic to them, of some otherworldly being influencing them, or an idea or a concept that gave them inspiration during this time of year. And there's always this concept of love, like, oh, it's the time of year for love. Like Love Actually, it's like, well, it's Christmas. You have to tell people you love them. Like it was like this magical thing. And so when writing this book, I was thinking like, why, let's bring back those concepts, because now it's become so material. This time of year becomes so grinding. It's so much less about the magic. I wanted to write a book that was about the magic again. But of course, being, a Norse pagan, I wanted to bring in those Nordic elements. And so the mysterious person that gives influence to the main character is Yulnir, which is a name for Odin. Another, which just means Yule figure. And then Yule Father is also, just Yule Father is another name for him as well. And so he gives advice to this boy, Eric, on how to bring back the magic of the season to his family. And so the whole story is about how to bring back the magic. And in the end, it ends in like a dinner where everyone's talking about their ancestors and talking about their family. And like one of the main magics of the book is he's able to bring back his father for the season by talking about him. Like literally in our world, we can't do that. If someone has died, we can't bring them back from the dead. But by talking about them, we allow them to live in some way. And so I definitely noticed that people don't talk about their family anymore. And I want to really encourage people to talk about their family, to tell stories, especially during this time of year. So this whole book encompasses a lot of these ideas. And of course, that's a lot of the ideas behind my channel, the community around the channel. So I really recommend picking up the book. So I think it will help you understand Norse paganism a little bit and maybe my philosophies on life. So you
I
can
love
find it
that.
on Amazon now. And so far it's sold over 300 copies, which is way more than I expected. So
Hell yeah, man.
yeah, I'm happy.
Congrats.
I'm writing a sequel. It's going to be called A Midsummer's Tale, and it's going to be based around the actual concepts of Midsummer that survive this week.
Sounds like we need that in the world. One last question before you take off. It just hit me. In the Marvel series, Odin is the god or the father of Thor. Is that the same in
Yeah.
paganism?
It is actually the same in mythology. So Odin is the father of Thor. He technically, like the story is actually he has Thor with the goddess Jord, which is the goddess of the earth. So
Mm.
I actually was commenting to someone today that was asking about this. I don't actually believe like gods have sex with each other in the sense of like I don't believe Odin went and had sex with the earth to create Thor. But what I believe is that people understand concepts of like Odin is, wisdom, is, the father figure, and then you have the earth mother, and then you have the concept of Thor and the thunder. And so those relationships of the father figure of wisdom and magic mixing together with the earth creates thunder because it's this big magical force. So I think we understand, our ancestors understood concepts to this, and that's why we have stories of Odin having Thor with the earth kind of thing. I don't think he was
Gotcha.
out there humping the ground or anything.
You never know. Energies can
You
be
never
weird
know. Hey,
sometimes.
I could be completely wrong, but I don't think so.
It goes back into what we were talking about earlier with like energies and invoking stuff. But guys, thank you so much for listening. Jacob, thank you so much for being here. If you learned something, guys, I always encourage you to share it. I know I learned a shit ton about paganism, pagan culture. Go check out Wisdom of Odin on YouTube and Instagram, but YouTube for sure, because that's where I found them. Again, please rate wherever you listen to this. Please rate, leave a 5-star review. Go follow Wisdom of Odin on YouTube and share this with someone who doesn't know as much as Jacob does about paganism. So thanks you guys for listening. And like always, I will see you guys in the 6th dimension.